Chapter 61. The End of the War in Volantis. This time, Harren finally caught a glimpse of the monster's general shape beneath the surface. Its head was shaped like a sharp cone, bearing a startling resemblance to the dragon heads of House Targaryen. Use javelins and crossbows, fire at will. Harren bellowed, roaring furiously again and again. As the massive creature moved through the water, the warriors of the Iron Islands seized their moment and loosed several arrows. But the wooden shafts couldn't pierce the deep sea, only the javelins barely managed to reach the beast's body. Even then, their speed was slowed drastically by the water, failing to break through its skin. After a long and fruitless effort, Harren could do nothing but watch as his longboats sank one after another. With no other choice, he raised his sword and signaled the retreat. Fall back. Everyone retreat. The crashing sounds were relentless. Almost every time they moved a short distance, the hull of another longboat would be struck and cracked. Only after the fleet had cleared the gullet and approached the shores of Blackwater Bay did the giant sea creature finally let them go. Harren stared at the writhing black shadow beneath the waves, still shaken. He couldn't tell if this sea dragon was somehow connected to House Targaryen, or if it was just a freak maritime disaster. But now, with barely a dozen longboats left, the plan to attack Dragonstone had clearly failed. According to Ironborn legend, the great king of the Age of Heroes once slew the mighty sea dragon Naga. But Harren knew full well what he was capable of and didn't make the foolish mistake of diving in to fight the creature head-on. With the raid a complete disaster, Harren had no choice but to slink back to Harrenhal in defeat. On the balcony of the Windworm Tower at Dragonstone. Old Nan Ilia slowly lowered her arms from their outstretched embrace, placing both hands on the stone railing, eyes tightly shut. After a moment's rest, her hair and eyes gradually returned to their usual grayish-blue hue. She let out a long sigh, adjusted her simple dark red housekeeper's robe, and muttered to herself, that sea snake devoured nearly 10 of the life seeds Aegon left behind, and took so many benefits from House Targaryen. We've only used it once in all these decades, such a waste, such a massive waste. In the Stepstones, aside from Ross Island, the most well-known islands were Bloodstone and Grey Gallows. Now that Ross Island had been burned down by Balerion, no one knew when, or if, it would be rebuilt. Among the inhabited islands of the Stepstones, Ross Island had essentially been wiped off the map. The other two key islands were swiftly taken with little resistance by the combined forces of the North and Dragonstone. Aegon spent nearly 2 months at sea before finally crushing the influence of Volantis in the Stepstones. The Targaryen fleet suffered minimal losses, while the warriors of the Winter Kingdom fought with unusual fervor. Perhaps Torrhen had realized his involvement in the war didn't matter much either way, and was simply trying harder to earn some credit. During the naval campaign, Dorne sent a messenger, announcing their intent to withdraw from the war and cease their involvement in the Volantis conflict. They also promised to send a shipment of treasure to appease the wrath of the Dragonlord of House Targaryen. This fence-visitor will have to be pulled out sooner or later. This wallflower will have to be pulled out sooner or later. After receiving Dorne's letter calling for an end to the war, Aegon tore it to shreds, but still agreed to their request. The immediate priority was to destroy Valentine, after all. If the dragon party of Valentine fled too early, House Targaryen would face endless trouble in the future. Once Aegon and the Storm King's joint fleet had pacified the forces across the Narrow Sea, they received news from the land-based coalition of the Five Kingdoms. The armies of the Five Kingdoms had already taken Myr. With strategic points on both flanks, Myr and the Stepstones, captured, the Volantis army stationed in Lee realized they had no way to hold their position. They preemptively withdrew to the heartland of Volantis. The free city of Lee was taken over by the Five Kingdoms armies without resistance. As the leader of the coalition, Aerion ordered Aegon and the Storm King's fleet to head for the Bay of Volantis and block the port, preventing the Volantine nobility from escaping. This world war, involving most of the known world, had consumed countless resources and manpower. If the Volantine elite were allowed to flee and no one was left to bear the consequences, then the alliance of the Six Kingdoms and House Targaryen would become a laughingstock. After resupplying at the Stepstones, the fleet entered a long, monotonous stretch of sea travel. Aegon and his sister Rhaenys took turns guarding the fleet, while Daemon arranged for several cargo ships to trail behind them. Everyone predicted that this war would yield unimaginable riches. Volantis was the free city closest to Slaver's Bay, located on the southern coast of the Essos continent. Having conquered and looted the free cities of Lee and Myr, its internal wealth was said to be beyond imagination. Demons sent messages to Dragonstone and Driftmark, ordering not just cargo ships, but even fishing boats to be requisitioned for transporting supplies and plunder. Time flowed quietly by, and 2 months at sea slipped past. The Five Kingdoms' land armies remained in constant contact with the fleets of the two allied realms, sending daily dispatches with victories like, "How many miles we advanced today," or, "Which towns we've taken." Tactical setbacks were rare. The Volantis army, like a bird startled by a bowstring, had fully retreated to their homeland. Then came the day when Aegon soared above the skies of the free city of Volantis, mounted atop Valyrian the Black Dread. The people of Volantis were reminded once more of what it meant to be ruled by dragonlords. The dragonlords' earth-shaking roar thundered over the ancient city, steeped in thousands of years of history, plunging the citizens and nobility alike into utter panic. Though tens of thousands of defenders still stood atop the city walls, and thousands of elite soldiers were stationed within the city's barracks, they brought no sense of safety to the hearts of the people. The overwhelming pressure radiating from Valyrian's colossal body, stretching over 100 meters, was simply too great. In contrast, Volantis's only silver magic dragon was barely 30 meters long, comparable in size to Vhagar and Meryx's. All of them were dragons born after the doom of Valyria. At the Volantis harbor, numerous nobles attempted to flee. But before their ships could even leave the bay, they were cut off by the advancing Targaryen fleet. The day after Aegon and the Storm King's fleet reached the bay, the combined forces of the Five Kingdoms slowly appeared across the plains outside the city of Volantis. Nearly 100,000 soldiers surged forward like a roaring tide, sealing off every major route into the city and locking down the ancient stronghold completely. On the same day, Volantis's letter of surrender was delivered to the coalition's war tent by an envoy, but no one paid it any attention. At this point, Volantis was like a fish on the chopping block, ready to be butchered. No one cared what the fish thought, everyone was focused on carving up the spoils of victory. That very day, Aegon and the Storm King met with the leaders and generals of the 5 land-based kingdoms. Inside the coalition's temporary war tent, the 7 great powers convened once more to discuss how to deal with Volantis, a city already doomed beyond salvation. This time, nearly every faction leader proposed revisions to the original alliance treaty concerning the division of spoils. Originally, in line with international humanitarian principles, the treaty had stipulated that Lee and Mur, 2 free cities that had been conquered by Volantis, would be restored to their independent status after the war. Now, however, many leaders were offering small suggestions, saying the cities could be rebuilt, yes, but not granted sovereignty. Instead, their triarchs and station troops would be appointed by the coalition members themselves. Arguments over interests filled the war tent. Meanwhile, inside Volantis, the ruling council was in a panic, like ants on a hot pan. They anxiously watched the coalition encampment outside the city walls, unsure of when the army might begin its assault. On the second night of the siege, chaos erupted within the city. The Tiger Party and the Elephant Party joined forces to launch a surprise attack on the Dragon Party's House Valentine, hoping to capture its leader, Jaehaerys, and offer him up to the coalition in exchange for their own survival. The Tiger and Elephant parties had little choice. With Balerion the Dragonlord looming above, the city walls that had taken thousands of years to build were utterly useless. The enemy wasn't even in a rush to attack, they were waiting for Volantis to surrender on its own. This was a war that could not be won. Under the constant surveillance of 3 dragons circling above, no clever tactic or ambush could succeed. As long as the coalition didn't make the mistake of turning on itself, Volantis was destined to fall. And so, the coalition's leaders became spectators to the unfolding drama. A chorus of battle cries rang out from within the city, and moments later, a silver dragon, long dormant in the underground dragon pit, suddenly burst into the sky. At first, Aegon thought it was trying to flee. But to his surprise, the silver dragon, about 30 meters in length, turned its fury inward, unleashing its dragonfire upon the city itself. In that moment, Aegon understood. House Valentine, backed into a corner and betrayed from within by the Tiger and Elephant parties, had chosen to burn the city down with them, dragging a few enemies into the flames. Even the destruction of wealth would deprive the coalition of valuable resources. But the Tiger and Elephant parties had clearly prepared for such a possibility. Not far from the dragon pit, dozens of siege crossbows had been set up in neat rows on nearby rooftops. The moment the silver dragon took flight, those siege crossbows unleashed a dense barrage of massive bolts. In the darkness, the dragon's silvery scales caught the faintest glimmers of light, making it all the easier to target. Countless bolts swarmed toward it like locusts, piercing it instantly. Its leathery wings were riddled with holes. Screeching in agony, the silver dragon thrashed violently before plummeting straight to the ground. Aegon's brows furrowed as he watched it fall. A sudden pang seized his chest. He drew in a slow, deep breath, his expression darkening with displeasure. In the end, he chose not to intervene in the turmoil consuming the city of Volantis. Early the next morning, the gates of Volantis slowly opened as a large cart pulled by several horses rolled out. On the cart rested a silver dragon head the size of a small boat, escorted by a group of Volantines as it left the city. The leaders of the allied forces had all come to the front lines to witness the scene. At a gesture from the leaders of the Tiger Party and the Elephant Party, the bodies of all the members of House Valentine were brought out one by one. With that, House Valentine, one of the last two remaining Dragonlord families in the world, was completely wiped out. Alongside the bodies, two silver dragon eggs were also presented. Aerion wore the same expression as Aegon had the night before, brows tightly furrowed. In Arion's mind, the death of Valentine's King Tie dragon should have come at the jaws of Balerion, not at the hands of mortals using siege crossbows. Though House Valentine was an enemy Dragonlord family, their downfall in such a pitiful manner undoubtedly tarnished the invincible aura of the Dragonlords. At that moment, Aerion keenly noticed the gazes of the Free City's rulers shifting, intentionally or not, between the silver dragon's skull and Balerion. He wasn't satisfied with the outcome, but the destruction of their foes was still something to be relieved about. The silver dragon eggs from House Valentine were also presented to House Targaryen by the Six Kingdoms. Naturally, the others had hoped to keep the rare and precious eggs, but Aerion had refused to concede a single inch on the matter. As stipulated in the alliance, the eggs were to belong solely to House Targaryen. After all, the free cities had once been colonies of Valyria. With their vast populations, finding a few bastards from former Dragonlord bloodlines wouldn't be difficult, and if someone with enough ambition backed them, another Dragonlord house could rise again. Following the Tiger and Elephant factions' surrender ceremony, the Allied forces officially entered Volantis. All of Volantis's original armies were disarmed and placed under centralized control. Its political officials were imprisoned, awaiting judgment by the coalition. Only now did the war that had engulfed nearly half of the known world finally draw to a close. What followed was the time for the Allied forces to divide the spoils and feast. If you'd like to support my work and unlock advanced chapters, you can follow me on Patreon. Up to 20 chapters ahead for now. Patreon comp BlurryDream. BlurryDream creators' thoughts. 6 comments 0 vote. Chapter 62. There shall be only one king in Westeros. Politics is dark and cruel in every world. After Volantis surrendered, it came under complete colonial rule by the Allied forces. Unlike the chains Valyria once placed on the 9 free cities a century ago, the 7 powers were far more resolute in their approach this time. With Volantis stripped of its freedom, its ruling party had no place left. The 7 powers established a multinational body known as the Federal Council. This council, made up of 14 representatives, would jointly govern the 3 free cities now under coalition control, Lee, Myr, and Volantis. The number of seats each power held in the Federal Council was determined by their strength within the alliance, granting different numbers of permanent seats. These permanent seats were closely tied to the annual output and profits of the 3 cities. House Targaryen, having brought 3 King Tie dragons into the war and fought with unmatched effort, earned 4 of those permanent seats. The war had ended. The smoke was beginning to clear. Aegon and his close friend Torrhen finally took a rare moment to enjoy the beauty of Volantis, strolling leisurely across the world-famous Long Bridge. As one of the 9 great man-made wonders, the bridge stretched like a giant dragon over the Rhoyne, linking the old and new districts of the city. Its scale and grandeur were breathtaking, no surprise it had earned a place on the list of wonders compiled by Lomas Longstrider. Aegon smiled and gave the bridge's railing a light pat, his laughter ringing out. I heard this is the longest sea-crossing bridge in the known world. They say it's strong enough to support 1,000 elephants. Truly remarkable. By their sides, elite warriors shadowed their every step, eyes sharp and vigilant, alert to any disturbance or assassination attempt. The two stood side by side, gazing out at the bustling harbor of Volantis. Merchant ships packed the docks, now all forcibly requisitioned to carry away immense stores of wealth and resources. This long bridge is impressive, no doubt, Torrhen said, leaning his hands on the stone balustrade and smiling. But it still falls short compared to the wall. That 200-meter-tall behemoth, The first time I saw it with my own eyes, I was speechless. The sheer awe it inspired, it's etched into me, something I'll never forget. If you get the chance, you have to see it for yourself. Months of war had left their mark on Torrhen. His face was more worn, more tired, perhaps from neglecting his beard, or perhaps from witnessing too much bloodshed. He tilted his head slightly, looking toward Aegon, whose hand rested on the hilt of Blackfire. Aegon's profile was sharp and striking, as if carved by the gods themselves. The features of high-born Valyrians were indeed otherworldly. Thank you, Aegon, Torrhen said sincerely. Thank you for everything you've done for Winterfell. This winter, fewer children and elders will have to die. Aegon gave a slight shake of his head but said nothing. Slowly, he drew Blackfire. The cold blade gleamed sharply in the sunlight. Care for a duel on the Long Bridge? Torrhen asked, his eyes gleaming with anticipation as he looked at his friend. Aegon remained silent, simply lowering the tip of Blackfire to one of the bridge's black stone pillars. A sharp scraping echoed as the Valyrian steel blade slid slowly across the stone, as if carving something. Torrhen watched curiously, puzzled. Only when Aegon sheathed the sword did he see clearly. 3 words had been etched into the pillar: the Great Conquest. The Great Conquest. Torrhen murmured, eyes full of confusion. Yes. The Great Conquest, Aegon replied with a slight nod. Then he asked, every winter, people in the north die in droves. What do you think is the true cause? The cold, Torrhen answered without hesitation. No. It's not the cold. It's the people, the heavy taxes imposed by the great lords along the trade routes from the narrow sea to White Harbor, Aegon said calmly, his face expressionless. Torrhen stared at those 3 forceful words, lost in thought. If one day, the taxes across Westeros could be governed under a unified system, Aegon continued, then in winter-ravaged regions like the north, those burdens could be reduced, or even lifted entirely. If that were done, the deaths of so many during the cold months could be avoided. He looked to Torrhen, his eyes steady and sincere. Unification. Taxation. The Great Conquest. You actually dare to conquer all of Westeros. Torrhen's eyes widened as he stared at Aegon, horror written across his face. Aegon said nothing at first, his expression calm. Westeros is in an age of chaos, hundreds of kingdoms, countless lords fighting over petty grievances. War never ends. Every day, lives are lost across the land. Nearly every year, 2 or more kingdoms are at war, and even the ones not directly involved see their lords turn to arms to settle border disputes. Don't you think this world is broken? This is your vision, Torrhen replied. The 7 kingdoms have ruled Westeros for thousands of years. Unification is impossible. It's too naive. Valyria was once the greatest power in the world, and it still fell in a single day. Why are you so certain that Westeros cannot be unified in our time? Aegon placed both hands on the hilt of his sword, grounding it before him. His gaze locked with Torrhen's, firm and unwavering. I dream of a Westeros without war, free of hatred, where all peoples can live in peace. That is all I want. Torrhen, my friend, I need your help. Torrhen stared at the young man before him. The sea breeze tousled Aegon's hair, lending him an air of otherworldly grace, as though he didn't belong to this world. I can't. I won't help you. Torrhen turned his gaze away, avoiding Aegon's eyes. As the crown prince of the Winter Kingdom, and with Winterfell squarely within Aegon's vision of conquest, he couldn't bring himself to betray his homeland or his people. Aegon gave a slight nod and looked back toward the harbor. His voice dropped to a quiet murmur. I understand your hesitation. But unification is the only way to lift Winterfell from its suffering. It's the only path to end the wars between lords and bring peace and stability to the common folk. Your loyalty to your father and to your council, that's a small love. True love is for all the people of the north. For every soul in Westeros. In the next 10 years, this continent will undergo a transformation not seen in millennia. Torrhen Stark, will you stand against the tide of history and be swept away, or rise with the wave and become its chosen child? Torrhen was shaken by Aegon's ambition. No one had ever dared to dream of uniting Westeros. Perhaps some had entertained the thought, but always as a foolish fantasy. Yet the young man before him had the power to do it. The world's only living dragonlord, backed by the deep heritage of House Targaryen. Torrhen did not dismiss Aegon's words as childish nonsense. I will stand on the side of righteousness. After a long silence, it was all Torrhen said, softly spoken, as if answering something far greater than the question itself. Aegon looked out over the endless sea, a satisfied smile forming on his lips. This conversation between Aegon and Torrhen was faithfully recorded by later historians in the annals of House Targaryen. The records described it as follows. Who has shown in the histories through virtue since the conqueror? Who has comforted the north with compassion since the loyal king? The history of the Targaryen dynasty, the great conquest. Since that day he spoke with Torrhen about the great conquest, Aegon and Torrhen's bond had only grown stronger. The two now seemed like true, steadfast friends. Torrhen entrusted the northern soldiers he had brought with him to Aegon, formally hiring them as mercenaries under Aegon's command. Then, carrying the grain he had earned through military merit, he set off on his return journey to the north. Aegon waved farewell to his friend at the port of Volantis. They had also made a private agreement. When Aegon launched his great conquest, Torrhen would once again send a new group of northern sellswords to join Aegon's campaign. At that time, the greatest shortcoming of the Targaryens' conquest plan remained their lack of manpower and population. Dragonstone's resources had been stretched thin just to muster a few thousand naval troops. The Targaryen land forces were also weak. House Celtigar of Claw Isle, though appointed by the Targaryens as their general, had little real experience. Since relocating to Dragonstone, the Targaryens had focused heavily on developing their naval strength and rarely participated in land warfare. Naturally, the army trained by House Celtigar was small and poorly equipped. Gaining Torrhen's support, and with it, the aid of northern warriors, was undoubtedly a significant boost to the prospects of the great conquest. 1 month later, the Allied forces began to gradually withdraw some of their troops. Just then, a system notification echoed in Aegon's mind. Ding! Congratulations! You've earned a rare achievement in the event, Destiny of Volantis. Reward. 1 blue grade lottery draw. Guaranteed minimum, blue tire item. Would you like to draw now? Yes. Aegon confirmed with a thought. The system chimed. Congratulations, you've received a blue quality item, renal adrenaline. Aegon tapped open the details to inspect the item. Item. Renal adrenaline. Type. Consumable. Quality. Blue. Rating. 3-3. Effect. A hormone that enhances kidney function, slightly boosting constitution. Note. Don't follow the path of the spinning king. What the hell am I supposed to do with this? I don't have kidney issues, Aegon complained inwardly. Time trickled by. Originally, Aegon had assumed his stay in Volantis would be brief, but reality turned out to be far more complicated. During the formation of the Federal Council, waves of negotiations around competing interests kept pouring in. Political wrangling was endless, with even a single issue dragging on for weeks at a time. Throughout those long months of building the council, Aegon watched his father Aerion's hair thin at a visibly alarming rate. The sheer mental strain took a toll that pained Aegon deeply. At last, 6 months later, the political structure and bureaucracy of the Federal Council, tasked with governing the 3 free cities, had finally stabilized. House Targaryen was granted the lifetime position of Federal Council President. Because he now had to manage council affairs, Aerion would no longer return to Dragonstone with Aegon. Given the difficulty of traveling back and forth, Aerion decided to host Aegon's wedding in Volantis, and formally passed the title of House Targaryen's head to his son. The wedding was held at the Grand Temple of R'hllor in Volantis. The temple was vast, its beams, stairways, walls, arches, towers, and skywalks intricately connected in seamless harmony, so masterfully crafted it seemed the entire structure had been carved from a single monolithic stone. The choice of venue had nothing to do with the Targaryens revering the Red God, it was simply the most majestic building in all of Volantis, naturally commandeered for the occasion. Aegon's grand wedding became the event of the century, drawing envoys from every nation across Essos and Westeros. The scene was one of unmatched splendor and prestige. Since the wedding was held in R'hllor's temple, the Targaryens made sure not to embarrass the Red God's clergy. They arranged for the high priest of R'hllor to officiate the ceremony. In the traditions of ancient Valyria, a priest's presence was essential for a wedding to be considered complete and sacred. Above the temple's dome, countless hues danced in harmony, reds, golds, yellows, and oranges blending like the radiant clouds of a sunset. Visenya and Rhaenys, dressed in ceremonial gowns of ancient Valyria, stood one on each side of Aegon as he led them into the grand temple. With the congratulations of envoys from all nations, Aegon and his sisters completed the wedding ceremony according to ancient Valyrian tradition. After greeting the guests, Aegon withdrew to his new chambers. This palace had once served as the royal residence of Volantis. But since neither of his sisters wished to serve him at the same time, Aegon was left with no choice. He had to visit each of their adjoining rooms in turn, fulfilling the wedding rites separately. As for whether he stepped into his elder sister's chamber first, or his younger sister's, Aegon never told a soul. At a far corner of the wedding banquet, King Argilac of the Stormlands sat frowning, drinking one cup of wine after another. He had once sworn to his beloved daughter that he would seize the stepstones as her dowry and deliver her in grand fashion to marry Aegon. And now, Aegon had married both of his sisters, 2 wives at once. How was he supposed to explain this to his precious daughter? Was he really going to let the girl he cherished become Aegon's mistress? Alas! The more Argilac thought about it, the more frustrated he became. He tipped back 2 more large gulps of wine and sat there alone, quietly stewing in his bitterness. The celebrations for Aegon's grand wedding lasted 3 full days. Soon after, Aegon and his 2 sister wives prepared to set sail and return to Dragonstone. This time, Maester Gon would accompany them on the voyage. Daemon Valyrian, however, remained behind in Volantis to assist Aerion in overseeing the Federation's military affairs and to ensure his safety. When Aegon officially accepted the role of head of House Targaryen, Daemon passed on both the lordship and leadership of House Valyrian to his eldest son, Ethan Valyrian. At the wedding banquet, Ethan formally swore an oath of allegiance to Aegon with solemn ceremony. Thanks to the resource support from Volantis, the Great Conquest could begin ahead of schedule. Given Volantis's proximity to Slavers Bay, Ethan had purchased a large number of war slaves there, who would now accompany the fleet back to Dragonstone. With those war slaves and the northern sellswords provided by Torrhen, Aegon had sufficient forces to begin the initial stages of the conquest. As they boarded the ship, Aegon held Rhaenys in his arms while Visenya leaned gently on his shoulder. The 3 siblings turned to wave their final goodbyes to their father, Aerion. Aerion stood on the shore, watching their figures fade slowly into the distance across the bay. For a brief moment, his eyes welled with tears. The Targaryens' upcoming campaign would still require ongoing support from the Federal Council, continuous funding to cover the enormous military expenses, along with the resources needed for Aegon's planned capital construction. All of it demanded a vast supply of material wealth. As long as Aerion could maintain a stable grip on the council, Aegon would not need to worry about resources during his conquest. And so began another long, dull voyage across the sea, stretching over several months. Aside from spending time with his wives, Aegon had little to occupy himself. Still, watching his destiny points steadily increase did offer some small satisfaction. You are diligently propagating your house. Destiny points gained. 0.001. You are continuing your efforts. Not to mention Aegon's return to Dragonstone to prepare for war. After King Argilac returned to Storm's End, he was consumed with sorrow. He had only one child, his daughter, Argilla. Burdened by guilt over breaking his promise to her and overwhelmed by her repeated reproaches, Argilac was deeply distressed. He assured Argilla that he would find her a better husband. But Argilla shot back. Is there anyone better than Aegon? Argilac was left speechless. Aegon was the only Dragonlord knight left in Valyria. Since the formation of the Commonwealth, House Targaryen's influence had extended across eastern Essos. Handsome, noble, and unmatched in talent, it was nearly impossible to find a more exceptional young man than Aegon. Valyria has a tradition of remarriage. Several generations of the Targaryens have taken multiple wives. I think. Argilla murmured softly. Absolutely not. How can the princess of the Stormlands become someone's mistress? King Argilac erupted, instantly rejecting the idea. He had never imagined his daughter's feelings for Aegon ran so deep that she would willingly sacrifice her honor just to be with him. Argilla pouted and clutched her father's arm, shaking it hard as she pleaded. I've fallen for him. You were the one who insisted I go meet him. And now that I like him, you're the one who's upset. It's all your fault for making me fall for Aegon, wah. Argilac did, in truth, feel ashamed. He couldn't bear to see his daughter crying and acting spoiled, so he slammed the throne with a heavy hand and said, exasperated. Fine, have it your way, just stop crying, my precious girl. Sigh. Argilla instantly stopped crying and beamed. Father, you're the best. Hee. Argilac sent an envoy to House Targaryen on Dragonstone to propose a marriage alliance, offering his daughter to Lord Aegon. As a dowry, he promised all the lands east of the God's Eye, south of the Trident, and north of the Blackwater Rush. When Aegon received the envoy's letter, he was stunned. Visenya and Rhaenys, upon hearing the news, immediately and firmly opposed the idea of Aegon taking another wife. For once, the two sisters stood united, both fiercely rejecting the notion of welcoming another sister into their family. Though Aegon was inclined to accept, he ultimately yielded to Visenya and Rhaenys' wishes and declined the Storm King's offer. In his reply, Aegon stated that he already had 2 wives and had no need for a third. He also pointed out that the lands promised had, for a generation or two, belonged entirely to House Hor, lands Argilac had no authority to give away. Aegon went on to propose. If Argilac is willing to cede Massey's Hook in addition to the offered dowry, along with the forests and plains south of the Blackwater Rush all the way to the headwaters of the Wendwater and Mander, then our houses may form an alliance. Furthermore, while I will not take Princess Argilla as my wife, I am willing to grant her a Dragonseed who may inherit the Stormlands. Argilac, proud and furious, flatly rejected the terms. He really thinks he can make my daughter his mistress. My Stormlands will never allow a bastard to inherit the throne. That would be an insult to Storm's End. Enraged, Argilac roared from his throne. He ordered that Aegon's envoy have his hands cut off, packed in a box, and sent back to Aegon with a message saying, "The bastard you fathered will only get these hands from me." Aegon did not immediately respond to the insult, as this gave him the perfect excuse to launch his campaign into Westeros. Instead, he summoned his friends, Bannermen, and principal allies to Dragonstone for a council. Following Maester Gon's advice, Aegon chose to commit fully to the performance. Though never a devout man, he went to the Sept to offer a solemn prayer to the 7 gods of Westeros. On the 7th day of the council, a great flock of ravens burst from the towers of Dragonstone, carrying Aegon's proclamation across the 7 kingdoms. They flew not only to each of the 7 kings, but also to the citadel in Aldtown and to castles great and small throughout the realm, bearing the same message. From this day forward, there would be only one king in Westeros. Those who bent the knee to Aegon of House Targaryen would keep their lands and titles. Those who resisted would be overthrown, cast down, or destroyed. Aegon's great conquest had begun. If you'd like to support my work and unlock advanced chapters, you can follow me on Patreon. Up to 20 chapters ahead for now. Patreon comp BlurryDream. BlurryDream creators thoughts. 6 comments 0 vote. Chapter 63. King's Landing. Aegon led his vast fleet to the mouth of the Blackwater Rush. For a moment, hundreds of large ships crowded together in the bay, their sails densely packed, covering the blue sea like a floating landmass formed entirely of ships. Although Blackwater Bay lacked the depth of the port of Volantis, its unique location held unlimited potential. It was more than capable of supporting the development of a massive port, exactly the place House Targaryen had long planned to establish their capital. He stepped steadily off the warship and looked carefully around the mouth of the river. Beneath the 3 forest-covered hills on the northern bank of the Blackwater Rush sat only a small, unremarkable fishing village. Countless soldiers stood neatly on the ships, eyes fixed on Aegon with hope and anticipation, silently waiting for the Dragonlord's command. Aegon looked solemn as he slowly knelt on one knee and kissed the ground beneath him with reverence, murmuring, "After a century of longing, Westeros, I have finally arrived." Then he stood decisively and thrust his arm forward with commanding force. Ethan, having received the signal, quickly blew the horn. A deep, resonant blast echoed across the bay. The warriors on board were instantly filled with fiery determination. Led by their commanders, they surged toward the hills like a raging tide. Their first goal was to establish camp at the fishing village and construct temporary fortifications. This time, Aegon commanded over 20,000 soldiers, with more troops and slave warriors from the north arriving continuously. The military camp had already been mapped out in advance. The builders, long prepared, sprang into action. As they disembarked, they immediately began surveying the land. Using Aegon's carefully divided city plans, they calculated each placement with precision, laying the foundation for the magnificent capital soon to rise. Then Aegon began his first campaign against those who refused to submit. Rosby Castle lay just a few kilometers north of the fishing village. Upon hearing of Aegon's landing, they delayed in pledging their loyalty. Aegon acted decisively, sending Orys to lead a force, accompanied by Rhaenys riding her dragon, to subdue the castle. At the same time, Visenya, mounted on her dragon, departed with Ethan's troops for Stokeworth, northeast of the village, to seize control of that stronghold. By afternoon, Rhaenys returned on Dragonback. She reported to Aegon that House Rosby had surrendered without resistance. This was an excellent start, undoubtedly a very favorable sign. If the other lords of Westeros were just as clear-sighted, Aegon's conquest would proceed far more smoothly. By evening, Visenya also returned on her dragon. She approached Aegon at a measured pace and gave a full report on the operation, which had encountered some turbulence. A few crossbowmen from House Stokeworth had dared to shoot at Vagar. The dragon, enraged, unleashed a torrent of flame, igniting the castle's roof. Only then did House Stokeworth finally surrender. Aegon frowned and listened closely to Visenya's report. Are these feudal lords brainless? How dare they try to resist when they are so weak? After pondering for a moment, it suddenly dawned on him. In this era, information was far too limited. Even neighboring lords, who had lived beside one another for years, only knew that House Targaryen had a few dragons. As for just how powerful the Targaryens truly were, they had no clue. Perhaps these decaying lords had never even stepped beyond their own tiny domains. Aegon didn't rush to lead a wide-scale military assault. Instead, he had his army work hand-in-hand with the master builders to continue constructing the city. Thanks to the steady stream of resources supplied by the Federation Council of the Eastern Continent of Essos, Aegon had everything he needed to carefully plan and build the capital from the ground up. 3 hills stood beside the fishing village. One of them, rich in geothermal resources, was without doubt an ideal site for constructing a dragon's nest. With its deepwater port, proximity to land routes, and natural terrain, this once unremarkable fishing village seemed as if it had been tailor-made by the heavens for House Targaryen. Aegon named the 3 hills after himself and his 2 sisters, bestowing upon them deep and lasting significance. After half a month of hard work, massive trenches had been carved into the ground around the village, part of a sewer system carefully designed by Aegon himself. The goal was to prevent future flooding and to manage waste, ensuring that filth would not accumulate in the city over time. From above, the outline of the town was already starting to emerge, with the shape of the future city faintly visible through the layout of the trenches. It was a glimpse of something grand in its earliest form. This was only the inner city, destined to become the location of the royal palace. Aegon had taken inspiration from the layout of London in his past life when drafting the design. With the inner city nestled against the 3 hills, it would be perfectly positioned for both riding and taming dragons. The outer city would be planned and built separately. For now, Aegon needed only to lay the foundation of the inner city and put up temporary wooden houses for habitation. As more supplies arrived from the federal parliament and additional resources were secured through conquest, the city would gradually enter full-scale development. At this stage, it was still just the beginning, only the foundation. Atop Aegon's hill, with his sisters at his sides, Aegon gave the hill a bold, resounding name. King's Landing. The port at Blackwater Bay had already begun operating. Each day, vast quantities of building materials arrived by sea, like streams feeding into an ocean, continuously fueling the construction of the city. Aegon's design for King's Landing included one major difference from the cities of old: it had no surrounding walls. Aegon declared proudly to his vassals, King's Landing needs no walls, because no one dares to challenge House Targaryen and our mighty dragons. But this bold claim was soon met with a harsh reality. Lord Darklyn of Duskendale and Lord Moodin of Maidenpool joined forces, merging their troops into a 4,000-strong army. With great momentum, they marched south, intent on driving Aegon and his invading forces back into the sea. A flash of anger crossed Aegon's usually calm face. He immediately ordered Orys Baratheon to lead the army in a direct confrontation while he mounted Balerion, the Black Dread, to strike from the sky. It was a battle of overwhelming imbalance, completely one-sided. The Black Flames Balerion unleashed were a force meant to destroy cities, not men. Against human flesh, it was simply too much. Bodies burned to ash in an instant, leaving nothing but pale, gray cinders. The outcome was inevitable. Both lords died in the lopsided battle. Darklyn's son and Moodin's younger brother, recognizing the hopelessness of resistance, surrendered their castles and swore allegiance to House Targaryen with due reverence. At the time, Duskendale was a key port on Westeros's side of the narrow sea, enriched by thriving trade. Visenya, well aware of the town's value, forbade her soldiers from looting it. Instead, she designated it as an important source of revenue to fund the ongoing conquest. Afterward, Aegon summoned Maester Gon. With a grave expression, he said, "Go and proclaim my victories and strength to the lords of Westeros. I truly don't want to continue killing without cause. That will only give House Targaryen a name for brutality." Maester Gon responded with a wry smile. "We may not have enough ravens. When we declared your kingship a few months ago, we were able to inform the continent's major powers because we had prepared in advance. But many ravens were killed by enraged lords, they never returned. Right now, we don't even have enough ravens to reach all the major forces. Upon hearing this, Aegon slammed his fist down on the armrest of his chair, his voice filled with frustration and regret. I don't want to slaughter all the people who will one day be my subjects. That would only leave me branded a tyrant. Seeing his lord so troubled, Maester Gon said, please allow me to return to the citadel in Aldtown. Aegon looked up, thoughtful. Maester Gon continued calmly. I am an Archmaester of history at the citadel and have the authority to use the Raven Tower. The Raven Tower is the largest raven roost on the entire continent, with more ravens than can be counted. It was originally meant to send seasonal updates across Westeros. If we use the Raven Tower, we can notify all the continent's major and minor powers and spread word of your strength and renown. Aegon gave a small nod, signaling his approval. Maester Gon didn't stop there. He continued. I've told you before, my father is the High Septon of the Faith of the Seven. I'll do my best to persuade the Faith to recognize your claim to the throne. I may even see to it that they crown you king. At those words, Aegon turned his head slightly in thought, avoiding Gon's gaze. In truth, he wasn't keen on involving the Faith of the Seven in his conquest. He had always viewed the Faith as a potential adversary, an entity best kept away from matters of royal authority. Blending divine power with royal rule would only plant the seeds of trouble for his future dynasty. Maester Gon waited patiently for Aegon's response to his second proposal. Aegon furrowed his brow slightly, his fingers tapping rhythmically on the tabletop, a habit he'd inherited from his father, Aerion. Whenever deep in thought, he would unconsciously fall into this pattern. After a long silence, Maester Gon couldn't help but speak again. The Faith of the Seven is deeply rooted in Westeros. If they endorse your rule, your claim to the throne will be much stronger. After all, House Targaryen migrated from Valyria. If you intend to rule Westeros in the long term, you must incorporate elements of the local culture. Your Highness, I urge you to think carefully. With that, Maester Gon stood, intending to give Aegon space to reflect. Aegon rapped his knuckles firmly on the table with a dull thud. Gon, mid-step, stopped and turned back toward his liege. Send my regards to the High Septon, Aegon said with a trace of resignation in his expression but absolute firmness in his voice. But my bottom line is this, the divine and the political must remain separate. The Faith of the Seven must never interfere in secular rule. Maester Gon gave a calm smile. The High Septon sent me to Dragonstone because he hopes your unified Targaryen dynasty will allow the faith to spread freely in the north. The church has no ambitions for political control. I've explained the faith's position clearly. I hope that eases some of your concerns. I hope so, Aegon said, giving a small wave of his hand to dismiss him. Maester Gon bowed respectfully and slowly exited the wooden council hall. Aegon sat alone in the hall, brows furrowed, weighing the pros and cons in silence. After a while, he called to the attendants outside. Bring me Crispian, head of House Celtigar. The attendant left to carry out the command. Moments later, there was a sharp knock at the door. Come in, Aegon said steadily. Crispian entered in haste and strode directly to Aegon. He bowed respectfully, then asked in a low voice. Your Highness, you summoned me. What would you have of me? Aegon's eyes landed on Crispian's forehead, glistening with fine beads of sweat. At this moment, Crispian was easily the most overworked and exhausted man in the Targaryen ranks. He was currently in charge of managing the Targaryen army's logistics, tracking construction expenses and accounting for endless streams of funds and supplies. Each task was draining, yet he handled them all with remarkable order and efficiency, a testament to his capable administration. Aegon gestured for him to come closer. Crispian nodded in understanding and quickly moved beside Aegon's chair. He knelt partially, leaning in to listen. Aegon lowered his voice. Here's the truth, our conquest of Westeros must be more than just military domination of land and bodies. In my eyes, the ideal conquest means reshaping the old order of the continent. Crispian tilted his head slightly, clearly not fully understanding, blinking at Aegon with wide eyes. Seeing this, Aegon continued patiently. I know it's a little hard to grasp. But think of it this way, Valyrian, the mightiest dragonlord, is ours. Overthrowing the Seven Kingdoms isn't difficult. But if all we do is crush the old world, how are we any different from the petty kings we mean to replace? Crispian gave a small nod, thoughtful. I think I'm starting to understand. Aegon saw the shift in his expression and pressed on. That's why we need a new order, an entirely new ideology to define our dynasty. The Citadel and the Faith of the Seven hold a monopoly on Westeros's knowledge and culture, Crispian said thoughtfully. Are you planning to move against them? Aegon gave a small nod, his expression showing satisfaction at Crispian's insight. From now on, begin quietly sending intelligent young minds to join the Citadel and the Faith of the Seven. I want them to grow up inside these institutions, and when the time is right, bring them down from within. Your will is my command, Crispian said, bowing his head in respectful acknowledgement. Chapter 64, Fire and Blood. On Aegon's Hill, a roughly built earthen fort served as Aegon's temporary palace. At dawn, the builders below the hill began their day's labor. The crisp sound of axes cutting through timber mingled with the steady thud of foundation work, drifting up to the second floor and waking Aegon from his sleep. He gently shifted Rhaenys, who lay asleep in his arms. Her soft, delicate body stirred with slight displeasure, supple and boneless, yet brimming with seductive charm. Aegon carefully pulled the pale blue quilt over her, leaving just a sliver of her snow-white skin exposed. Noticing his thoughts stirring once more, Aegon sighed to himself. Before using renal adrenaline, I often felt overwhelmed dealing with both sisters. But after using it, it feels like I can't get enough. He slipped on a loose robe and stepped onto the bedroom's balcony. The morning sun had just begun to rise above the waters of Blackwater Bay. The dazzling scene slowly washed away the haze of waking too early. Now, the great conquest of House Targaryen was like that rising sun, ascending over the continent of Westeros. The dozen or so lords surrounding King's Landing had all been subdued by Aegon's men. Unfortunately, few of them had surrendered willingly, most had only bent the knee after a baptism of dragonfire, something that left Aegon displeased. Maester Gon had already departed for the Citadel in Aldtown. With the construction of King's Landing ongoing for over a month, he should be nearing his destination. Aegon hoped Gon could spread word of his power to the remaining petty lords. Conquering them one by one was far too tedious. There was also good news from the Kingdom of the North. Aegon's close friend, Torrhen Stark, had succeeded his aging father and ascended the northern throne. Perhaps the North, in facing the threat of the Dragonlord, felt a younger and stronger king would be better suited to weather the crisis House Targaryen's conquest presented. Roar! A mighty dragon's cry suddenly echoed across the skies of Blackwater Bay. Vhagar was soaring joyfully, wheeling through the clouds. Aegon instinctively looked up at the sound, a flicker of thought passing through his mind. My sister has been so focused lately on training the troops and mastering the art of riding dragons, she hasn't shared my bed in some time. Rhaenys is starting to seem a bit overwhelmed. Looks like I'll need Visenya to shoulder some of that responsibility too. Though Visenya was breathtakingly beautiful, her icy temperament made her difficult to approach. She was far more invested in battle and dragon riding than in physical affection, making Aegon's dream of sharing a bed with both sisters feel like a distant fantasy. Lowering his gaze, Aegon looked toward the heart of the inner city still under construction. He noticed that the bulk of the heavy labor was being handled by slaves shipped in from Volantis, while the newly subjugated Andal locals were assigned only lighter tasks. Aegon returned to his chambers and resumed morning lessons with Rhaenys. You are working hard to produce offspring. Time passed unnoticed, and their training lasted until noon. Eventually, Aegon had to pause the lesson. House Targaryen had an important matter to address in council. After his attendants carefully washed and dressed him, Aegon descended to the council chamber on the first floor of the earthen fort. Upon entering, he found his key advisors already waiting. Visenya, Crispian, Ethan, and others had gathered. As their liege arrived, the expressions on their faces showed a hint of awkwardness. Aegon immediately understood. Clearly, the fort's soundproofing wasn't up to standard. Rhaenys' voice must have carried far too well. The vassals all rose and hurriedly bowed. Aegon remained composed as he walked steadily to the main seat. With a slight nod, he began to preside over the meeting. He sat calmly, resting his hands naturally on the table, and spoke in an even tone. We currently have 3 generals in our army. Orys, as the chief among them, you may begin by summarizing the progress of our campaign against the disloyal. Orys stood again and bowed, then reported. We have now conquered all the lords along the Blackwater Bay, and the territories we've taken are fully connected. The lands under our control now border those of the false kings of Westeros. To the south of the Blackwater Rush lies the Storm Kingdom. Argilac, holding a grudge against us, is gathering his forces and has stationed heavy troops at Grassy Vale. To the north of the river, Harren the Black, the king of the Riverlands and the Iron Islands, is building fortifications along the southern shore of the God's Eye. The current movements of the Reach and the Westerlands remain unclear, with no obvious signs of military activity. Aegon tapped the table lightly with his fingers, then turned his head toward Visenya. What do you think, sister? He asked softly. Visenya raised her chin slightly and said with a touch of disdain. Fight them. Anyone who resists, crush them, until they submit willingly. At that moment, Crispian spoke up. Your Highness, in my opinion, before continuing our military advance, we need to strengthen your claim. Only then can we be seen as acting with legitimacy, rather than simply as invaders. After all, our goal is to conquer and rule, not to build colonies. Aegon nodded, inviting him to continue. Crispian stood and spoke solemnly. Though we've made some gains, during my visits to more than 10 surrounding castles, I found that the local people do not acknowledge your rule. They still view us as no better than pirates from the Iron Islands. This sentiment could lead to serious problems. I believe you should hold a coronation ceremony, to declare your name to the people and enemy leaders alike. Let them see that you are the one true king, and that the barbaric reign of 100 petty lords has come to an end. The young Ethan voiced his agreement. The territory we now hold is already the size of a small kingdom, more than sufficient grounds for a coronation. I believe Lord Crispian is absolutely right. Visenya also nodded. Exactly. Since you've already announced your intent to conquer the great lords, it's only fitting to hold a coronation and formally establish the Targaryen dynasty. Aegon looked around the room. After a brief pause, he nodded and said. Since you all request it, I will hold the coronation ceremony in 3 days. Crispian, you'll remain in charge of the arrangements. I'll provide you later with a list of official appointments for the Targaryen dynasty. As you command, Your Grace, Crispian replied with a respectful bow. Hearing this, the other vassals exchanged glances. Their eyes gleamed with excitement and anticipation. A coronation was no simple affair, but House Targaryen had long been preparing for this moment. The dynasty's name, era title, and sigil were all ready. In ancient Valyria, the Dragonlords had no tradition of heraldry. But in Westeros, noble houses held deep-rooted customs of sigils and banners. To demonstrate House Targaryen's determination to rule for generations, Aerion had long ago instructed old Nan to carefully embroider a silk battle banner. A black field bearing a red, three-headed dragon, breathing fire. On the day of the coronation, a massive wooden platform had been erected below Aegon's stronghold. Though the setting was humble, Crispian had arranged every detail of the ceremony thoroughly. The defeated lords from around the Blackwater were all summoned to appear before Aegon. On the platform, more than 10 lords knelt before his wooden throne, alongside the senior advisors of the Targaryen household. Each laid their sword at Aegon's feet. When Queen Visenya placed a Valyrian steel crown, studded with rubies, upon her brother's head, Rhaenys stepped forward and declared loudly, Aegon I, king of all Westeros and protector of all its peoples. The 3 dragons perched on the surrounding hills roared in unison. Lords and knights erupted into cheers, but the loudest voices came from the former fishermen, farmers, and their wives of the small fishing village. Tens of thousands stood at a distance, witnessing the simple but solemn ceremony. Yet Aegon noticed something unsettling. The newly conquered folk from the surrounding areas watched with cold detachment. They looked upon him with no warmth, but neither did they resist. Their silent indifference made Aegon frown, like a thorn had lodged itself in his palm. Still, the coronation was completed successfully. Aegon raised each of his kneeling vassals, one by one, confirming their lands, titles, and the offices they would hold in the new dynasty. Almost all of House Targaryen's former advisors were granted new honors. Ethan Velaryon, Lord of the Tides, was appointed Master of Ships and given command of the royal fleet. Crispian Celtigar was named Master of Coin. Orys Baratheon, whom Aegon called, my shield and my strong right hand, was placed in charge of all ground forces with the title of Marshal of the Armies. Following the declaration of the Targaryen dynasty and his self-coronation as Aegon I, Aegon, as head of House Targaryen, formally announced the house motto. Fire and blood. Heraldry and mottos were cherished traditions among the lords of Westeros, and the newly subjugated vassals took this as a powerful sign that Aegon was not just an outsider imposing his will, but one who had embraced and begun to shape the identity of the land he now ruled. It was only then that many of them truly, and willingly, recognized him as the one true king of Westeros. The day after the coronation ceremony, Aegon received a letter delivered by Raven from Gon. Maester Gon had already activated the Citadel's Great Raven Tower, dispatching thousands of ravens to deliver House Targaryen's declaration of conquest, and Aegon's noble status as Dragonlord, to lords across Westeros. This lifted Aegon's mood. House Targaryen was not native to Westeros, nor had it spent generations cultivating fame or goodwill on the continent. Since their arrival at Dragonstone, they had remained largely isolated. Gon's campaign of messaging was, therefore, not just helpful, it was essential to establishing the legitimacy of their rule. In this, Aegon owed Gon a personal favor. But the second letter that arrived from Gon shortly after nearly made him explode with fury. In this new message, Gon relayed that the Faith of the Seven had agreed to crown Aegon, on the condition that he first conquer House Gardener in the Reach and arrive in Aldtown. Moreover, the Faith refused to disband its militant orders and had added a new demand. They sought to become the sole official religion of the Targaryen dynasty. Aegon hurled the letter into the fire and roared. Greedy, insatiable worms. He offered no reply to Gon's second letter. Instead, he ordered the Maester to continue spreading word across Westeros that he had already been crowned the first king of the Targaryen dynasty in King's Landing. Just a few days after the coronation, Aegon led his forces to war once again. He personally commanded the main host north and west, toward the God's Eye and Harrenhal, the monumental fortress that stood as both a symbol of King Harren the Black's pride and obsession. Queen Rhaenys accompanied him, riding Merryx's, her silver-scaled, golden-eyed dragon. Orys Baratheon led a portion of the army southward to hold the line along the north bank of the Blackwater Rush, where Stormland forces had begun massing at Grassy Vale. Meanwhile, Ethan Velaryon led the Targaryen fleet north out of Blackwater Bay, sailing toward Gulltown and the Vale. Queen Visenya flew above him, riding Vhagar. To Aegon, Harrenhal held strategic importance for the future of his reign. He was determined to seize it first and secure it before splitting his forces into three. For now, he chose to divide them only into two, keeping one group back to hold their position. As the Targaryen dynasty began another sweeping wave of conquest, the kings of the Seven Kingdoms were also receiving word from Gon in Aldtown about Aegon's coronation and the founding of the Targaryen dynasty. The Seven Kings were suddenly struck with a sense of dread, as if a great storm had descended. In the Riverlands and the Stormlands, King Harren the Blackheart and King Argilac the Arrogant quickly called their banners and began preparations for war. To the west, King Mern of the Reach traveled north along the ocean road to meet King Loren of House Lannister at Castley Rock. The two sought to coordinate a response. From Dorne, the princess sent a raven to Dragonstone, offering to aid Aegon in his campaign against Argilac, on the condition that she be treated as an equal ally, not a subordinate. Ronel Arryn, the Little King of the Eyrie, also expressed interest in an alliance. He promised to send the armies of the Vale to help Aegon against Harren the Black. However, his mother demanded all the land east of the Green Fork of the Trident as payment. Far to the north in Winterfell, Torrhen Stark, the new king in the north, spent the night in council with his bannermen and advisors, discussing how to respond to the looming threat. Exhausted, he returned to his chambers alone and pulled out a letter, one written in Aegon's own hand. My friend, do not worry. All is going well. If you'd like to support my work and unlock advanced chapters, you can follow me on Patreon. Up to 20 chapters ahead for now. Patreon.com, BlurryDream. BlurryDream creators' thoughts. 5 comments 0 vote. Chapter 65. With food and drink, they welcome the king's host. Although Torrhen, king of the north, had already secretly pledged himself to Aegon, many of his bannermen remained in the dark. Believing themselves under threat from a Targaryen invasion, they were still actively preparing for war. As soon as Aegon's letter arrived, Torrhen did not hesitate. He immediately dispatched the remaining 2,000 members of his personal guard from White Harbor to Dragonstone. At that moment, Torrhen had staked everything on his decision. Every winter in Westeros claimed countless lives in the north. They not only had to remain ever vigilant against wildling incursions, but powerful beasts from beyond the wall would also appear from time to time. Torrhen was tired of a life spent running, scraping, and bleeding to survive. If Aegon could keep his word, waiving all winter taxes on grain ships arriving at White Harbor and ensuring that soldiers from all over Westeros would contribute to the defense of the wall, then Torrhen felt he could accept him. This so-called High King, this self-styled Big Brother, he might just be worthy of that recognition. The people of the North had always been practical. Survival and benefit, such matters were always weighed simply and plainly. In the days that followed, Torrhen and his council received a new envoy, one sent by Harren the Black, king of the Iron Islands and Riverlands. Pressed by the might of the Dragonlord, Harren sought to ally with the north to resist the expansion of House Targaryen. Your Grace, this is a gift from the gods. One of Torrhen's advisors urged with delight. The Dragonlord is too terrifying and powerful. We should ally with the Iron Islands and the Riverlands. Torrhen remained seated, calm and silent, atop the throne of Winterfell. On his head rested the eternal winter crown, which shimmered with a ghostly cold light. Carved from a single slab of meteorite, it had been passed down by House Stark for tens of thousands of years. Below, his bannerman continued to speak at length, offering lofty speeches about shared fate and mutual survival. But to Torrhen, it all sounded like the incessant buzzing of flies echoing through the hall. The Citadel has already warned that this final autumn is nearing its end, he thought, weary. Instead of helping me prepare grain, you ask me to strike down my closest friend. When winter comes, the wildlings will attack the wall more fiercely than ever, driven by hunger. He sighed internally, a deep exhaustion weighing on his chest. With a slow, deliberate motion, Torrhen rose, using the great sword Ice, the ancestral blade of House Stark, to steady himself. Your Grace, Harren's envoy, seeing Torrhen move, looked to him in anticipation. Torrhen stepped down from the throne, dragging the massive blade behind him. His expression was like a frozen wasteland, utterly devoid of warmth. All eyes in the hall followed his every step, the screech of ice scraping against stone ringing sharply through the air. Sensing something amiss, Harren's envoy dropped to his knees, eager to plead his case again. Your Grace, ah. Before the words were finished, the envoy's head had already flown into the air. Blood sprayed upward, painting the space above the throne room in a crimson arc. Torrhen stood cold and silent, gently wiping the blood from the blade of ice. He spoke just one phrase, flat and unyielding. Winter is coming. Aegon led an army of over 10,000 men, moving in stops and starts for more than half a month before finally reaching the shores of God's Eye. Standing atop Valyrian, he gazed into the distance, taking in the full expanse of the lake. All around the lake, reeds spread like a dense forest, growing wild and unchecked. Slender yet tough, the stalks were crowned with overlapping layers of leaves that swayed gently in the breeze. Waterfowl soared and dove among the reeds, occasionally plunging into the water or flapping upward with loud cries that echoed across the lake's surface. Dismounting from Valyrian, Aegon looked to Rhaenys and sighed. These wild roads are impossible. If we want to conquer the Seven Kingdoms, I wager we'll spend half our time just marching. The infrastructure of Westeros was in dismal shape. The so-called roads were nothing more than narrow animal trails, rough and uneven. Carriages were unusable, and the army's progress was constantly impeded by difficult terrain. The lords of Westeros spend their days fighting and killing one another, Rhaenys said with a sigh. Looks like building roads was never their concern. Rhaenys, who had grown up on Dragonstone, found the wild mainland landscape both new and fascinating. Along the journey, she and Aegon had left traces of their affection in forests and streams, beside rivers and groves, atop ancient trees, and, of course, on Dragonback. Aegon shook his head slightly, his gaze steady. One day, I'll build a road that connects all seven kingdoms. I'll call it the King's Road. Without trade, how can Westeros afford its heavy taxes? If all we have are serfs, we'll be left with nothing but the northwest wind to eat. What's the northwest wind? Rhaenys asked, smiling. It's a saying, Aegon replied patiently. It means being so poor, you've nothing left to eat. Now, the army was encamped on the lakeshore, with Harrenhal looming faintly on the opposite bank. From the camp, it would still take 2 days' march to reach the fortress. Aegon's force now numbered close to 20,000 and was made up of a chaotic mix of factions. His commanders included everything from slave traders of Volantis, Torrhen's northern guards, former retainers of House Targaryen, and newly surrendered Westerosi nobles. Though the Targaryen dynasty enjoyed strong logistical support from the Federal Council and was well supplied with provisions, it was short on manpower and population. In this age of conquest, Aegon turned no one away. So long as someone could fight, they were enlisted. As night fell, a thin mist began to rise from the surface of God's Eye, wrapping the lake in a soft, translucent veil. The reeds within it faded in and out of sight. Stepping out of his royal tent to inspect the camp, Aegon immediately sensed something amiss. The infrared imaging in his artificial eye detected a cluster of red dots hidden among the reeds along the lakeshore. Enemy attack! Aegon shouted. He reacted instantly, sounding the alarm to his commanders by horn, then rushed to the dragon camp, mounted Valyrian, and soared into the night sky. Not all dragons possessed night vision, but Valyrian, the Black Dread, might have been an exception. Rhaenys' dragon, Merryx's, lacked such sight, so she remained behind in camp with her mount. As Aegon flew over the lake, he saw a number of longships slipping quietly through the reeds. Fortunately, the Targaryen army had already discovered the Ironborn's ambush, and the longships were retreating in haste, trying to escape the lakeshore under Targaryen control. Aegon sneered in contempt. "You've come this far, you think I'll just let you go?" Valyrian swooped down, his massive tail lashing across the water. In a single strike, over a dozen longships were smashed like brittle kindling. The Ironborn aboard tumbled into the lake like rag dolls, defenseless and helpless, quickly becoming food for the lake's fish. Aegon had no desire to unleash dragonfire here, not because he spared his enemies, but because the terrain around God's Eye was far too wild. The dense vegetation, thick reeds, and the dry autumn air made it a tinderbox. If Valyrian unleashed even a few breaths of his inextinguishable black flame, it could easily consume everything, perhaps even his own forces. After several rounds of aerial strikes, Aegon completely wiped out the ambushing Ironborn before returning to camp. Thanks to his early warning, and the nobles and commanders acting swiftly to maintain order, there was no chaos in the ranks. The next morning, the rising sun cast golden light across God's Eye. Soldiers looked out at the ruined reeds and the severed limbs drifting in the water. Then, a thunderous roar of celebration broke out across the camp. Each and every soldier felt a wave of relief and silent gratitude. They were on the side of the Dragonlord, and glad for it. The army resumed its march, following the lakeshore with Harrenhal in their sights on the opposite bank. The towering fortress could already be seen faintly in the distance. Along the way, Aegon discovered two more groups of Ironborn lying in ambush among the reeds and willow groves. It was utter folly. Without hesitation, Aegon ordered his longbowmen to draw and fire. Arrows rained down like a swarm of locusts, cutting the Ironborn to ribbons in an instant. Aegon had no idea that each of the two ambushes he had just crushed had been led by one of King Harren's sons. The former heir himself had died in silence beneath a storm of arrows, his corpse sinking quietly to the bottom of the lake. During the two-day march toward Harrenhal, aside from those two doomed ambushes, there was a near-constant stream of Riverland's nobles arriving to kneel before the advancing royal army. House Blackwood, House Mallister, House Vance, House Frey, House Strong. In just one day, the army was forced to halt nearly 10 times due to the sheer number of Riverland's lords blocking the road to pledge their allegiance. Clearly, the plan to reach Harrenhal by nightfall would not be possible. Aegon received the defecting lords in his command tent, and from their conversations, he finally came to understand the situation. Though House Hoare had ruled the Riverlands for 3 generations, the native lords of the Trident harbored no affection for their Ironborn rulers. When Black Harren built the monstrous fortress of Harrenhal, tens of thousands of laborers perished from overwork, while the region was ruthlessly stripped of materials and gold. Both nobles and commoners alike had been drained of everything. When Aegon neared God's Eye, Lord Edmund Tully of Riverrun had already raised a rebellion. He had originally been summoned to garrison Harrenhal, but instead, he chose to defect to House Targaryen, becoming the first to raise the banner of the three-headed dragon over his castle. Now, Lord Tully himself was leading a force of knights and archers to Heart Tree Ford, where he planned to rendezvous with Aegon. The Riverlands lords who had arrived ahead of him had only done so to compete for the honor of being the first to surrender. They had broken off from Tully's main host and ridden ahead in hopes of earning favor and reward. Upon learning all this, Aegon's gaze turned deep and thoughtful as he looked toward the road ahead. Lord Tully's efforts to incite so many lords to rise against King Harren were no small matter. For being the first major lord to submit, Aegon did indeed owe him a reward. Yet, in Aegon's original plan, Harrenhal was to remain under direct royal control, a vital stronghold governed by a crown-appointed magister of the Riverlands. Aegon did not intend to grant Harrenhal to anyone outside the royal house, and he didn't even want the Riverlands to remain an independent ducal domain. I'll meet with Lord Tully first, Aegon thought. Then I'll decide. After several more hours of marching, the army arrived at Heart Tree Ford, the location described by the Riverlands lords. It was a shallow part of God's Eye, where more than a dozen striking heart trees stood along the banks. Beneath the towering weirwoods, roughly 200 knights and over 1,000 archers were resting. As the army of the Targaryen dynasty appeared on the horizon, a ripple of commotion ran through the waiting soldiers. From among them, a knight wearing a silver trout on his chest and a blue cloak across his shoulders rode forward alone. The middle-aged knight dismounted calmly before the royal army, removed his steel helm and tucked it under his arm. Dropping to one knee in front of the royal pavilion, he bowed his head and waited in silence. The army parted slowly to let their king through. Aegon approached on a white horse, the sound of hooves echoing as he drew near and gazed down at the kneeling knight. It was indeed Lord Edmund Tully. At a glance, the nobleman of the Riverlands behind Aegon had made it clear. This tall young man in a deep crimson robe was none other than King Aegon I of the Targaryen dynasty. Yet Edmund still found it difficult to believe. Aegon looked far too young. Lord Tully drew the sword from his belt, laid it across both palms, and raised it high above his head. Aegon dismounted and walked toward him. Edmund stared at the steel boots before him, swallowing nervously. Would House Tully rise to stand at the summit of power in the new Targaryen dynasty, or be cast aside as just another modest secondate house? It all hinged on this very moment. Edmund hoped with everything in him that Aegon would prove generous. If I could be granted the title of Lord Paramount of the Riverlands, then House Tully would ascend to greatness in a single stroke. If you'd like to support my work and unlock advanced chapters, you can follow me on Patreon. Up to 20 chapters ahead for now. P@Triancom, BlurryDream. BlurryDream creators' thoughts. 3 comments 0 vote. Chapter 66. Harren the Black. Aegon reached out and took the steel sword that Lord Tully held high, then gently laid the blade on the lord's shoulder. His expression was calm and composed as he spoke solemnly. I'm truly gratified, Lord Edmund, that you can so clearly distinguish right from wrong. It's a rare virtue. You've made a meaningful contribution to my cause, and the Targaryen dynasty will never neglect those who have earned merit. In the name of Aegon I of House Targaryen, I hereby grant you the title of Lord Paramount of the Trident. From this day forward, you shall manage the affairs of the Trident on my behalf. Edmund's hands trembled slightly with excitement at these words. His family had lived and flourished in the Riverlands for tens of thousands of years, long among the most prominent houses in the region. Yet they had never truly unified or ruled the entire Riverlands. Aegon's reward finally realized the Tullys' long-standing dream. Edmund quickly responded, "Thank you, Your Grace, for your great kindness. House Tully will swear undying loyalty to the rightful rule of House Targaryen." Nearby, the heads of House Strong and House Frey exchanged knowing glances. They had both noticed the subtle wording in Aegon's declaration. He had granted Edmund a governorship, but not a ducal title. Aegon had neither raised House Tully to a lordly rank nor granted them dominion over the entire Riverlands. Both men shared a quiet, meaningful smile. Aegon handed the ceremonial steel sword to Princess Rhaenys for safekeeping, then extended a hand to Edmund, gently helping him to his feet. He looked Edmund in the eye, his tone sincere. The title of Lord Paramount of the Trident shall henceforth be hereditary in House Tully. As for the Riverlands, I still have other important plans for the region and cannot yet establish it as a separate duchy. I hope you understand. But for House Tully's loyalty and service, I will ensure that proper reward comes once the great conquest is complete. Edmund's earlier excitement cooled as the reality of the situation settled in. He hadn't been granted the title of Lord Paramount. The name Magister of the Trident could easily be mistaken for something grander than it was. A flicker of disappointment crossed his heart. Even so, he quickly bowed and said, "Your Grace, to serve as Magister of the Trident is already an immense honor. House Tully asks for nothing more." Aegon gave a slight nod, patting Edmund's upper arm with a reassuring smile. "Don't be discouraged. Aside from House Hoare, your family is the most powerful in the Riverlands. Once the great conquest is complete, I will see to it personally that you are named a lord. That is my promise to you." Edmund's eyes lit up with a flash of surprise and gratitude. He made to kneel again, but Aegon reached out and stopped him. That firm promise dispelled the last trace of doubt lingering in Edmund's heart. Night fell. Aegon hosted a grand bonfire banquet beside the royal tent, hoping to help the Riverlands nobles grow acquainted with the lords and retainers of the Targaryen court. At the feast, as Aegon made rounds and exchanged courtesies, nobles from the Riverlands kept coming forward, warmly introducing their daughters to him. The Targaryen dynasty had only just been founded, and as conquest swept across the land, many noble families now faced ruin. For others, it was a rare opportunity to rise. No longer concerned with Westerosi norms of monogamy, after all, the king himself had taken 2 queens, these lords thought it only reasonable to offer one of their daughters in marriage as well. With Rhaenys seated beside him, Aegon could hardly accept the advances of noble maidens eagerly seeking his favor. He politely turned them all away, one by one. As the most powerful lord of the Riverlands, Edmund remained by Aegon's side throughout and witnessed all of it. He found himself pondering whether he, too, should make an offer. He had 3 daughters, after all, 2 of them twins. His family's hallmark auburn hair, coupled with the twins' fine features and graceful bearing, perhaps they truly stood a chance. While laughter and music filled the Targaryen camp late into the night, a very different mood hung over Harrenhal. The Iron King Harren stood atop the tallest tower of his fortress, the Iron King's Tower, gazing out toward the distant glow of the Targaryen campfires. Even from here, he could see the flicker of flame and hear the far-off signs of revelry. His mood soured. Not a single Riverlands noble had responded to his call for aid. He knew full well, how could he not, that the Targaryen camp must now be crawling with traitors from the Trident. Traitors. Filthy pigs. Harren roared, hair bristling with rage as he pounded the stone railing of the Iron King's tower. Now, Harren had truly reached a dead end. His only 2 sons had gone to launch a surprise attack on Aegon's army, only to be discovered ahead of time and killed on the spot. The blow to the Iron Kingdom's morale was devastating. The Ironborn were a savage people who preyed on the weak, and with Harren now caught in such a desperate struggle, it only fanned the flames of ambition in those who dreamed of killing their king and taking his place. Not long ago, Harren had received word that rebellion had broken out in the Iron Islands. 3 factions were involved: House Volmark of Harlaw, Rolder, the High Priest of the Drowned God, and Bicken Greyjoy, leader of the raiders on Pike. Together, they were blocking reinforcements from House Hoare from reaching the Riverlands. This forced Harren to grow wary even of those he once trusted most. Even when his advisors urged him to abandon Harrenhal and retreat to the Iron Islands, he suspected a hidden scheme behind the suggestion, fearing an ambush on the way by rival houses who might try to kill him and seize power for themselves. Deep down, Harren simply couldn't bring himself to let go. He had poured decades of effort into the construction of Harrenhal. This towering, colossal castle, the tallest and grandest in all of Westeros, had nearly drained the Iron Kingdom's resources built up over centuries. How could he just walk away from it? It was like one of those properties Aegon had bought in his past life. Just as the mortgage was nearly paid off, would he really walk away now and stop making payments? Of course not. The logic was the same. Harrenhal had only been completed and occupied for a few days before Aegon brought his army to its gates. Now, Harren was filled with rage and frustration. He wanted to scream, but there were no more tears left to cry. In truth, he already knew how this would end. The Iron Kingdom, cut off and without allies, was doomed to fall. With no heir, House Hoare was destined to die out. At this moment, the only thing Harren wanted was to be buried alongside the one thing in the world he still cared for, his castle. That night, Harren tossed and turned, unable to sleep. He didn't dare summon his wives or concubines to serve him. With no sons left, and all his wives being daughters of powerful houses from the Iron Islands, he couldn't be sure where their loyalties now lay. Eventually, in a daze, Harren drifted into a deep sleep. But in the blink of an eye, he seemed to regain consciousness. Is this a dream? He murmured. Harren now found himself standing on the aerial bridge that connected the main towers of Harrenhal. He was alone, walking through the newly finished castle, surrounded on all sides by darkness thick as ink. The castle was so vast that even he, its master, was lost inside it. He had no idea how far he was from his bedchamber, he didn't even know which tower he was in. Cold, clammy stone walls flanked him on either side, and the single path ahead stretched into a bottomless abyss of black. In the suffocating silence, only the sound of his own footsteps echoed off the walls. He tried to stop, but his feet refused to obey. Out of the darkness, something suddenly tripped him. Harren bent down to pick it up. It was a broken deer antler, with a ruby crown soaked in blood still dangling from it. When he straightened up, the darkness before him had vanished, replaced by fire. From within the flames, a black monster came charging forth. Its body loomed like a mountain, and even the towering Harren felt utterly insignificant in its presence. Is this the monster that killed my 2 sons? Harren thought to himself. The giant beast quickly spotted him. As their eyes met, a chill swept through Harren's body, the cold seeping into his bones. His hand instinctively reached for his waist, and just as his fingers brushed the ivory hilt of his sword, the dragon suddenly opened its blood-red maw. Your Grace! Your Grace, wake up! In the darkness, a voice called out urgently, and the whole world seemed to shake around him. The dragon and the flames vanished the moment Harren's eyes snapped open, replaced by the towering dome above him, countless fireplaces along the walls, and Maester Tion standing in front of him. Maester Tion was trying desperately to wake him. It took Harren a while to regain his senses and realize he had somehow ended up asleep in the hall. Was I sleepwalking? He rubbed his throbbing temples. He remembered that in his grandfather's final days, the old man often wandered in his sleep. Back then, young Harren would laugh at him for it. Now I'm just like him, Harren muttered to himself. Your Grace, Aegon has surrounded Harrenhal with his army and is requesting a negotiation, Maester Tion said gently as he helped the Iron King to his feet. Aegon. That damned dragonlord of Valyria. That boy and his band of Riverlands traitors, are they realizing they can't take my castle? Harren laughed wildly. Maester Tion gave no response. He had seen Balerion with his own eyes, the monstrous size of the dragonlord's mount. To him, Harrenhal looked no more than a large toy fortress in the shadow of such a beast. Harren kept ranting, hurling insults at the Targaryens, his expression growing more and more unhinged. After a while, Maester Tion quietly reminded him, Aegon is waiting for your reply at the castle gate. Harren's tirade came to an abrupt end. He lowered his head, a touch of weariness in his voice as he waved a hand. I know. Tell that hairless boy I'll meet him outside the gates at sunset. With that, Harren turned and walked off in silence toward his iron tower, leaving Maester Tion with nothing but the sight of a lonely figure retreating into the distance. Tion bowed respectfully and said, Yes, Your Grace. By evening, Harren had donned his royal armor and made his way toward the Great Hall of Harrenhal. The nightmare from the previous night left his body aching, and the chain around his neck jingled with every weary step, the metallic clinking echoing through the empty hall. Harren enjoyed that sound, more than harps or bagpipes, it was sharp and real. Your Grace. The lords of the Iron Kingdom stepped forward to greet their king. Harren gave them a cold glance, reading the shifting thoughts behind their expressions. Now, let us leave the castle together. He yanked the cloak embroidered with the horse sigil from his squire's hands and clasped it to his shoulders himself. Outside the hall, the men chosen by his chief bodyguard were already waiting, fully armed and ready. Harren selected a chestnut mare and climbed into the saddle. In that moment, he seemed to shed his wrinkles and white hair, once more becoming the Iron King who had once terrified the entire Riverlands. He waited for the captain of his guard to raise the banner of House Hoare high, then spurred his horse forward with a sharp kick and galloped toward the castle gates. Open the gate, Harren shouted. With a low mechanical groan, the steel-plated gate slowly began to rise from the muddy ground, the massive opening yawning like the maw of some ancient sea serpent. As the outside world came into view through the widening gate, Harren spotted Aegon, king of the Targaryens, astride a white horse, waiting calmly at the far end of the drawbridge. Aegon, with his silver hair and purple eyes, wore a magnificent suit of black scale armor. A dark red cloak hung from his waist, and the banner behind him fluttered high. It was a black flag, emblazoned with a fierce, three-headed red dragon. Compared to the vast army of tens of thousands behind Aegon, Harren's few hundred soldiers looked pitifully small. Dozens of nobles in gleaming armor stood close around the young dragonlord. Aegon sat tall on his white horse, chin slightly raised, his eyes fixed unwaveringly on Harren. But what chilled Harren even more were the two dragons looming behind the army. One of them, a black dragon over 100 meters long, lay coiled like a massive black mountain. Before it, any living creature seemed utterly insignificant. Harren stared into Balerion's blood-red eyes, and his throat tightened. A cold shiver ran down his spine. This was the very same monstrous beast that had appeared in his nightmare the night before. Are you Harren Hoare, the false king of the Iron Kingdom? The young King Aegon of House Targaryen was the first to speak, his voice cold and crisp. Watch your tongue, Maester Tion immediately shouted. You stand before the king of the Iron Islands and the Riverlands, the master of the largest and strongest castle in Westeros, His Grace, King Harren I. If he's truly a king, why is he cowering inside his castle like a coward? Aegon gave a faint smile as he looked at Harren. I've heard the Ironborn are a fearless people. I'll regard this meeting as one between two kings, Aegon I of House Targaryen, Harren replied loudly, face stern and expressionless. Then what would you advise? Aegon raised an eyebrow slightly. Since you're the one who proposed this negotiation, let's hear your terms first, Harren responded coldly. Aegon remained calm and began to speak slowly. Kneel before me. Renounce your claim to the Riverlands and Harrenhal. Acknowledge me as the sole king of Westeros. In return, I will grant you the title of Lord of the Iron Islands. As your king, I will forever protect you and your house, and fully support your right to rule the Iron Islands, just as I do with the lords on both banks of the Blackwater Rush. Gagagaga. Harren burst into shrill laughter. His sharp, grating cackle echoed through Harrenhal's massive gate, startling a flock of sparrows roosting nearby. Aegon's brows drew together slightly, a flicker of displeasure crossing his eyes. It was a long while before Harren's laughter faded. He stared straight at Aegon and spoke. King Aegon. That's your offer. Yes, Aegon answered. Then hear mine. Harren suddenly roared, his voice thunderous. Disband your army. Return all the lands you've seized. Hand over every riverland's lord who's sworn to you, let me deal with them. Then you can safely crawl back to that desolate stone island you call home and keep playing your little game as the Stone King of Blackwater Bay. Gagagaga. I don't want bloodshed, Aegon said, his voice cold as iron. But I do, Aegon, Harren replied, slowly shaking his head. His tone was hoarse and low. You killed both of my sons, House Whore has no heirs now. Aegon went quiet. For a moment, he said nothing, realizing he had likely killed Harren's sons during their failed ambushes. Still, Aegon didn't want to inherit a blackened ruin scorched by dragonfire. What he desired was a new castle. A perfect one. Brand new. 9 levels tall, pristine and flawless. Look behind me, old Harren, Aegon continued calmly. Take a good look at the banners flying behind me, Silver Trout, Dancing Maiden, Heart Tree with a Raven, the Red Horse, I believe you recognize them. Harren tilted his head slightly, sneering. I know them. They were once my vassals. Traitors, cowards, and bastards born of donkeys and fish. The Iron King's vicious insults instantly enraged the Riverland's lords beside Aegon. Furious shouts erupted as they hurled curses at Harren, an onslaught of foul language pouring forth. Aegon calmly raised a single hand, silencing the commotion. Surrender now, and you may still rule the Iron Islands. This is your final chance. I command 20,000 men, and 2 dragons. One of them stretches over 100 meters long, the last true dragonlord in the world. Harren didn't let him finish. I don't care what you've got, he shouted. All of you are outside my walls. And my walls are tall, thick, and unbreakable. Dragons can fly, Aegon replied evenly. Gagagaga. Harren suddenly laughed again. Stone doesn't burn, he told Aegon with absolute certainty. Aegon shook his head, helpless. His gaze drifted westward, toward the setting sun. When the sun sets, your Iron Kingdom will fall, Aegon said coldly. Harren spat hard on the ground, yanked his horse around, and shouted over his shoulder. The Iron Kingdom will never fall. The massive gates of Harrenhal slammed shut with a thunderous crash, driving deep into the mud. Dirty water splashed up, splattering across the dark red robes of Aegon's royal garb. Aegon glanced down at the stain on his collar, then looked up once more at the iron gates. He let out a long, heavy sigh. Inside the castle, Maester Tion walked side by side with Harren. Your Grace, perhaps you really should consider King Aegon's proposal carefully. After all, the Dragonlord can fly. Maester Tion finally couldn't hold back and spoke up. He wasn't a coward, just genuinely concerned for the aging king. Harren said nothing, walking in silence as they made their way to the top-floor bedchamber of the Iron King's tower. At the doorway, Harren paused, his back to Maester Tion, and said quietly, Tonight, go to that boy Aegon and tell him that I'll be sleeping at the top of the Iron King's tower. And remember, don't let him know I sent you. Maester Tion froze, staring in stunned silence at his liege lord before blurting out, Your Grace, I'm not that kind of man. I'll always remain loyal. Harren slowly turned around to face him, tears already streaming down his weathered cheeks. The old king placed a broad hand on the maester's shoulder, gently cutting him off. Choking back his emotions, Harren confided in him. Tion, the North and the Vale, those neighboring Harrenhal, have both refused us aid. The Riverlands and the Iron Islands have betrayed us. My only 2 sons are dead. Now, all I have left is Harrenhal. I just want to stay here, with it, forever. I only wish to die with dignity. Can't you even grant me that one final request? Maester Tion's mouth hung open, speechless. For a long moment, he didn't know how to respond. But under the old king's pleading gaze, tears welled in his own eyes as well. At last, he slowly knelt before Harren and said with sorrow. As you wish, my king. If you'd like to support my work and unlock advanced chapters, you can follow me on Patreon. Up to 20 chapters ahead for now. Patreon.com, BlurryDream. BlurryDream creators' thoughts. 4 comments 0 vote. Chapter 67, The Last Storm. Harren gave a slight nod to Maester Tion, who knelt at his feet, then stepped back and gently closed the door to the Iron King's bedchamber. He walked to the window, his gaze drifting into the distance. The blood-red sun had already sunk halfway beneath the hills of the Isle of Faces, casting its dying glow across the sky in a blaze of crimson. After a long moment, he turned back to the mirror in the room. Harren lifted a hand to wipe away the lingering tear stains from his face. He carefully adjusted the steel chain-scaled armor on his body, and once he was fully dressed, he walked heavily to the bed. He lay down slowly, hands folded over his abdomen, still clad in the heavy armor, and gradually closed his eyes. As the last ray of sunlight faded from the windowsill, darkness swept in like a tide. The sound of massive wings beating the air shattered the silence. Harren's clasped fingers trembled slightly as he fought the urge to open his eyes. Valyrian's pitch-black body blended perfectly into the night, becoming one with the darkness. The sentries at Harrenhal were not alerted at all, until the great dragon descended like death itself. By the time they noticed, it was far too late. Boom! A deafening blast rang out as a flood of black flame surged into the bedroom, instantly devouring the entire chamber. The fire crackled and snapped, the searing heat distorting the very air. Within just a few breaths, Harren was reduced to ash under the black flames. He didn't even have time to scream before vanishing into the endless blaze, leaving behind only a scorched husk. The Iron King who had ruled both the Iron Islands and the Riverlands was no more, and the Riverlands now formally submitted to the Targaryens. Aegon sat astride Valyrian, staring down at the main tower, what the messenger had called the Iron King's Tower. The tower's summit had collapsed under the assault of the black flames, and fire still raged within. The Iron King's Tower now looked like a massive candle set alight, its form twisting and melting, streams of molten stone running down its sides. Perhaps from now on, this tower should be called the Kingspire Tower, Aegon murmured to himself. He signaled for Valyrian to cease breathing fire, wary that the 100-meter-high structure might collapse under the intensity of the black flames. As Harren had once boasted, stone did not burn, but his fortress had not been built entirely of stone. Red fire and black flame roared across the Iron King's Tower. The Ironborn guards scrambled to douse the blaze with water. Fortunately, Aegon had not ordered Valyrian to target the more flammable parts of the castle. The fire was brought under control by the Ironborn when it had burned down 3 floors from the top. At Harrenhal's gates, Maester Tion knelt weeping, surrounded by lords of the Riverlands. None could understand why this traitorous Maester was crying so bitterly. Black Harren was dead. And this man, who had stabbed him in the back and delivered the message to Aegon, shouldn't he be celebrating? The next day, smoke still rose from the top of the Iron King's Tower, but the rest of Harrenhal remained unscathed. The Ironborn opened the castle gates and surrendered. With that, the Riverlands were fully subdued under the Targaryen dynasty. Aegon held a grand feast in the Hall of 100 Hearths to celebrate the tremendous progress of his conquest, and once again summoned all the Riverlands lords to swear their allegiance. Let us now turn to Visenya's campaign against the Kingdom of the Vale. Unlike Aegon's smooth and swift conquests, Visenya's path was fraught with difficulties from the very beginning. House Arryn quickly assembled its fleet and received reinforcements from Braavos. Dozens of warships rushed to their aid. Off the coast of Gulltown, they clashed with the Targaryen fleet and dealt it a serious blow. Aegon's naval commander, Ethan Velaryon, was killed in the battle. Queen Visenya descended from the skies on Vhagar, setting the Vale's ships ablaze and salvaging what could have been a disastrous defeat. Though Gulltown was in a perilous state, the remaining Targaryen naval forces were no longer capable of taking the city, one of the 5 largest ports in Westeros. With little choice, Visenya withdrew, leaving a portion of the fleet stationed at Claw Isle while she flew to Harrenhal to reunite with her husband. At Harrenhal, Aegon gathered with his chief advisors to plan their next moves. It was decided that his younger sister, Rhaenys, would lead several thousand troops drawn from Riverland's nobles to assault the Bloody Gate, while his elder sister, Visenya, would travel to Crackclaw Point to bring the local lords under their banner. Aegon himself led the main host to the southern bank of the Blackwater Rush to support Orys Baratheon. Word had reached him that the Storm Kingdom had attempted to cross the river multiple times, but each attempt had been successfully thwarted by Orys. This tactic, striking the enemy mid-crossing, was one Aegon had personally instructed Orys to use before departing. Now, it was time to face the Storm Kingdom directly. Visenya, astride Vhagar and commanding an elite force, made her way to Crackclaw Point, where she was met with sincere and eager welcomes from the local populace. Crackclaw Point had known nothing but war since the Dawn Age. The House Darklyn of Duskendale, the House Mutin of Maidenpool, and the House Celtigar of Claw Isle had all tried to conquer it, none had succeeded. Even in times of peace, internal conflict ran rampant. But now, the Targaryen dynasty offered them a rare and precious hope for lasting peace. Once news of King Harren's demise reached Crackclaw Point, its lords quickly bent the knee. And when they learned that Queen Visenya was willing to take them on as her direct vassals, many of the local lords swore their loyalty with fervent enthusiasm. Due to the urgent situation in the Stormlands, Orys, already short on troops, was nearly unable to hold the line after several grueling battles. Aegon made a swift decision to ride Valyrian ahead to reinforce the front, while part of the main army boarded the longships left behind by Harren. Sailing through the God's Eye and into a tributary of the Blackwater Rush, they made rapid progress toward the battlefield. When Aegon arrived on Dragonback, the Stormlands army was preparing to cross the river. Valyrian's thunderous roar struck terror into their ranks, and the Stormlanders broke into a panicked retreat. Orys received Aegon at the camp and gave a detailed report on the recent engagements. Aegon praised his efforts and briefed him on the Targaryen conquest's broader progress. The next day, Aegon dispatched an envoy across the river with a letter, proclaiming the Targaryen victories in the Riverlands and the grim fate of Black Harren. The message urged the Storm King not to persist in resisting the Dragonlord's forces. After receiving the envoy, the Stormlands troops on the southern bank of the Blackwater Rush withdrew of their own accord and fell back to Grassy Vale. However, once the envoy returned, Aegon still received no reply from the Storm King. Days passed with no word, and by then, the elite main force traveling downstream by longship had arrived and regrouped. Aegon decided to go on the offensive. He led over 4,000 soldiers safely across the Blackwater Rush, then launched a rapid march toward Grassy Vale. With Balerion smashing open the gates, the town was swiftly taken. While regrouping at Grassy Vale, Aegon received a message from King Argilac of the Stormlands. Argilac sought a decisive battle with Aegon. The letter of challenge ended with a few bold words written in the Storm King's own hand. The victor shall be king. Aegon accepted the challenge. Unlike King Harren's treacherous bannermen, Argilac's vassals remained fiercely loyal. The proud Storm King gathered a host of nearly 20,000 at Storm's End. Determined not to repeat his old rival's fate, roasted alive in his own castle like a suckling pig with an apple in its mouth, King Argilac chose to meet Aegon in open battle outside Storm's End. The Targaryen forces, bolstered by Balerion's looming presence, secured a steep slope that offered a commanding view of the battlefield. On the day of battle, the Stormlands lived up to their name. From morning onward, rain fell in sheets, and by midday, fierce winds howled across the field. Argilac's advisors urged him to postpone the attack until the weather cleared, but the Storm King was confident. His army outnumbered the enemy nearly 4-1, with almost 8 times the knights and heavy cavalry. Seeing the drenched Targaryen banners flying atop a hill he considered his own, Argilac burned with rage. The seasoned warrior also noticed the south wind was driving rain straight into the eyes of the Targaryen soldiers. And so, the proud Argilac gave the order to attack. Though vastly outnumbered, the Targaryens held their ground. Orys remained true to the oath he had sworn Aegon, personally leading his knights in resisting the enemy charge and temporarily holding the line. The battle raged deep into the night, the ground soaked in blood, a far cry from Aegon's swift victory at Harrenhal. Argilac led 3 cavalry charges against Orys Baratheon's position. But the slope proved too steep, the rain had turned the earth to mud, and the charging warhorses slipped and stumbled. Each assault lost cohesion and momentum before reaching its mark. Even so, the Stormlands infantry climbed the slope on foot and managed to turn the tide. The Targaryen soldiers, their vision blurred by rain, didn't notice the approaching spearmen until they were nearly upon them. Their bowstrings were soaked and useless. One hill fell, then another. Argilac seized the moment, launching a 4th and final charge. This time, he and his knights broke through the center of the Targaryen lines. The Storm King's personal guard crashed straight into Aegon and Balerion. Even grounded, the Kingtier dragon was a terrifying force. Dickon Morrigan, commander of the vanguard, and the bastard of Blackhaven were both consumed by dragonfire, and many of Argilac's royal knights fell with them in a valiant stand. Panic swept the battlefield. Warhorses, spooked and confused, bolted in every direction, crashing into their own cavalry lines and shattering the once cohesive formation. Amid the chaos, the Storm King himself was thrown from his mount. Argilac did not give in. As Orys led his forces down the muddy slope for a counterattack, he spotted the old king locked in combat with 6 or 7 opponents, their corpses already strewn at his feet. "Stand aside," Orys shouted, then swiftly dismounted and advanced on foot to face the Storm King. At that moment, Aegon stood atop Valyrian's massive head as the dragon slowly paced forward. One hand gripped the black dragon's horn, the other leaned heavily on the family sword, Blackfire. Aegon shouted, "Stand down, I'll take him myself." Upon hearing this, Orys pounded his armored chest with a fist, bowed his head in deference, and stepped back. Valyrian lowered his house-sized head slowly. Aegon leapt from it, landing firmly in the middle of the rain-soaked, muddy field. "Argilac," Aegon said as he walked steadily up to the Storm King, drawing Blackfire and holding it upright before his chest, his expression grave. "For the sake of the battles we once fought side by side, I'll give you one last chance. Defeat me, and I'll bow and serve you. Lose, and you kneel before me." Argilac was breathing hard. The old king had endured several charges and was nearly spent, but not done. He still had the strength for one last fight. "So be it." Argilac roared, lunging at Aegon like a tiger pouncing on its prey. The gleaming blade in his hand flashed like a streak of silver, trailing crystal raindrops as it slashed viciously at Aegon's neck. Aegon stepped swiftly to the left, narrowly evading the deadly edge. Blackfire swept out in a curved arc through the rain, executing a Valyrian military technique. The blade met Argilac's sword at its weakest angle. Clang! A loud metallic crash rang out as the swords collided, sending sparks flashing in the downpour. Argilac did not falter. In his decades of battle, he had faced swordmasters as skilled as Aegon. His sword, though knocked off course, spun in an elegant outward flourish and returned solidly to his grip. Their first clash ended evenly, neither had gained the upper hand. The duel surged on as their swords danced like wind-driven chaos, striking and parrying with furious speed. The clanging of steel rang out like relentless war drums. The fight was ferocious. The aged, white-haired warrior king and the silver-haired, purple-eyed dragonlord of House Targaryen clashed again and again in the rain and mud. Aegon, striking and defending in rhythm, thought to himself, "There's something strange about this old man's strength, it must be tied to the storm somehow. No ordinary man could endure this long against someone who's activated, outer tyrant, inner king." The duel had drawn a massive crowd. Soldiers from both the Targaryen host and the Stormlands had surrounded the field 3 ranks deep, forming a great circle. All around them, warriors bellowed with fury and passion, cheering on their respective kings. The roars of the crowd rose above even the howling winds of the storm outside Storm's End. At that very moment, atop the walls of Storm's End, Princess Argilla stood alone in the pouring rain, gazing down at the decisive clash unfolding below. Her body began to glow with a faint white light. She slowly lifted one hand and pointed a single finger toward the sky. The storm above Storm's End grew even more violent. A slender snake of lightning twisted down from the clouds, brushing her fingertip like a lover's touch, unwilling to part. Tears streamed down Argilla's cheeks as her body trembled uncontrollably. The lightning on her fingertip thickened, crackling with growing power. "Aegon! Father, stop fighting!" She screamed with every ounce of strength she had, and with a forceful motion, swept her glowing finger down toward the center of the duel. Boom! Thunder cracked like a war drum. A blinding silver bolt, thick as an arm, exploded downward, striking the ground at Aegon and Argilac's feet like molten silver bursting from the sky. If you'd like to support my work and unlock advanced chapters, you can follow me on Patreon. Up to 20 chapters ahead for now. Patreon comp BlurryDream. BlurryDream creators' thoughts. 5 comments 0 vote. Chapter 68, The Storm Queen. A blinding flash of lightning exploded across the dueling ground, blasting a shallow crater into the earth. The nearby soil was instantly scorched black. Aegon and Argilac, the Storm King, were hurled backward by the sheer force of the impact. Aegon slowly pulled himself from the mud. For a moment he just stared at the smoking pit before him, dazed, then lifted his gaze toward the storm clouds above, disbelief etched across his face. That bolt, how had it struck the ground between them, and not the 2 ironclad warriors locked in battle? Argilac lay where he'd landed, motionless. Seeing this, his advisor, Evenstar Seldar, rushed forward to lift the old king's head, but Argilac lashed out, slapping his hand away with a sharp, violent strike. The Storm King stared skyward, howling incoherently. His fists clenched and slammed again and again into the sodden ground. Seldar could only step back in silence. Orys approached Aegon and asked quietly, "Your Grace, what now? Do we press the attack?" Aegon exhaled heavily, wiping the rain from his face. He simply stared at Argilac, now pounding the mud like a tantruming child, and slowly shook his head. After a while, Argilac seemed to surrender to fate. The old king stopped thrashing. He lay in the muck, gazing up into the curtain of falling rain, unfazed as the water pooled in his eyes. Targaryen soldiers began murmuring among themselves. Some could already sense how this war would end, and murmurs turned to whispers of excitement. The Stormlands warriors, by contrast, stood silent and still in the rain, heads bowed, looking like broken men. Defeat meant the end of the Storm Kingdom. Grief hung thick in the air, as rain and tears mingled freely on every face. Princess Argilla emerged from the crowd and ran forward. The hem of her once white silk gown was soaked in mud, and the rain had plastered her clothes to her body, outlining her graceful figure. She dropped to her knees in front of the Storm King and knelt beside Argilac's head, gently stroking his bearded face, overcome with sobs. The Storm King stirred, his voice hoarse and quiet as he looked to the sky and asked, "Why, Janna?" Argilla slowly shook her head, offering no reply. "Why didn't you strike Aegon down? I chose this storm for you, to unleash your divine power at its peak. Don't you see? You've destroyed the Stormlands." Argilac's voice grew louder, angrier. He seized his daughter's pale arm and shook it violently. His eyes were wide with fury, brimming with tears, though whether from sorrow or rain, none could say. "You're the traitor who killed the Stormlands. You ended a legacy that stood for thousands of years. You're a disgrace to every soul in the Stormlands." Argilla collapsed against his chestplate, sobbing uncontrollably, unable to speak. Aegon brought his sword crashing into the ground beside them, silencing Argilac's tirade. He stepped forward, towering over the old king, and said coldly, "Remember this is not your daughter's fault. The Targaryen dynasty unifying Westeros is the will of the times. Did you think having her strike me down with lightning would save the Stormlands? Dragons have 3 heads. Even if I fall, my 2 queens will avenge me. Can you make it rain every day for the rest of your life?" Argilac was struck dumb, his mouth half open, staring blankly up at the dark clouds above. At that moment, even Star Seldar of the Stormlands knelt before Aegon. Turning to the old king, he said, "His Grace Aegon speaks true. This is fate. Even a storm can't defeat the Dragonlord. We concede defeat. We, House Tarth of Evanfall Hall, will honor our vow and recognize His Grace Aegon as the rightful king of Westeros." "You." Argilac glared furiously at his captain of the guard. Aegon was quietly pleased. He remembered Seldar. Back during the Battle of Ross Island in the War of Volantis, Aegon had saved his life while riding Valyrian. A man who remembers such debts is one worth keeping. Seldar's act stirred the rest of the Stormland lords. One after another, they knelt before Aegon and pledged their allegiance. Argilac struggled upright, trembling with rage, pointing at his kneeling vassals. He tried to speak, to shout them down, but no words came. At last, his hand dropped, limp. He closed his eyes and slammed his fists into the muddy earth again and again. Aegon stood over him, waiting patiently for the Storm King to surrender. "Since you've all chosen to submit to the Targaryen dynasty, I won't stop you." Argilac rose from the ground and walked alone off the battlefield. "I'll pass the crown to Argilla. I won't let the Stormlands, the legacy of my ancestors, die in my hands." He paused, then turned to glance at Aegon with a sideward smirk. "And don't you forget, you promised me a Dragonseed." Aegon could only stare at the old fox strutting off with a shake of his head. Then he bent down and lifted Princess Argilla into his arms, holding her tightly and showing her off to the Targaryen soldiers as his prize. The moment their skin touched, Aegon used his chip to scan Argilla's unique talent. Crank, storm god's blood. In stormy weather, you gain the ability to control storms. The strength of your control scales with your mental power plus 10. Same crank as mine, but bound to specific weather. Still, deadly strong, Aegon thought. As he held Princess Argilla, the Targaryen warriors erupted into cheers. Even Stormland's soldiers shouted in excitement, thrilled to serve a king so bold and valiant. Aegon had defeated the Storm King in single combat, won the hearts of the enemy's troops with his sharp words, and even captivated the Storm Princess with his looks. In every way, he embodied the might and charisma of a true king. Naturally, he had earned the allegiance of the Stormlands. Cheers roared in wave after wave, each louder than the last. Aegon carried Princess Argilla toward Storm's End. She clung to him tightly, arms wrapped around his neck, face buried in his chest, letting this strong man bear her weight. Despite the pouring rain, the people of Storm's End poured from the gates, lining the streets to witness this epic moment. It was clear, the Dragonlord's legendary conquest would be immortalized in history and sung by countless bards for generations to come. Having conquered a foreign king and claimed the heart of a princess, Aegon now strode like a demigod of the Age of Heroes, bathed in legend. The Stormland vassals watched Aegon carry their princess through the gates of their stronghold, and could not help but admire his courage. Just moments ago he was locked in deadly battle, now he walked boldly into his enemy's fortress. Such daring was beyond anything they had ever seen. That night, Aegon entered Storm's End and personally washed the mud from Princess Argilla's delicate body. Her cheeks flushed red as she lowered her head, allowing him to cleanse her in silence. The air was thick with tension and intimacy, only the sound of water and their quickened breath remained in the chamber. Later, in Argilla's beautifully adorned bedchamber, the two were consumed in a deep and passionate union. Aegon had once promised the Storm King that he would not marry Argilla, only give her a child. There was no need for formalities. Storm's End itself was a towering and majestic stronghold, rising straight into the sky. Massive battlements crowned its summit, and from afar, the fortress looked like a colossal spiked fist punching toward the heavens, unyielding, defiant, and indomitable. Its footprint was not as expansive as Dragonstone, home of House Targaryen, but it was built with unparalleled solidity. Every wall and structure was formed from stone blocks weighing tens of tons. One could only wonder how the ancients of the Age of Heroes had managed to move such titanic stone. Aegon and the Targaryen army remained at Storm's End for a few days to rest. During that time, Argillac never once came to see Aegon. It was said the old king had locked himself in his bedchamber, refusing all visitors save for meals. The next time Aegon saw him was at the ceremony where Argillac passed the throne to his daughter. The old king personally placed the crown, passed down through his line for thousands of years, on Argilla's head. He stared at it with deep sorrow, and at last, unable to contain his grief, broke down in tears. He waved off his former retainers who tried to comfort him, and left the great hall alone, departing Storm's End. Determined to leave the land of his heartbreak behind, Argillac boarded a ship to Volantis that same day, where he would join Aegon's father, Aerion, to serve as a permanent member of the Federal Council. Argilla remained standing where she was, watching her father's lonely figure fade into the distance. Her heart swirled with complex emotion. She understood the pain and helplessness in her father's heart, and the weight that came with this transfer of power. The old king's silhouette finally vanished at the far end of the hall. Argilla turned her gaze to Aegon, eyes full of resolve. She knew the burden she was about to bear. Though some fear lingered in her heart, it was outmatched by her determination. Queen Argilla of the Stormlands stepped forward with elegant poise, approaching Aegon as he stood observing the ceremony. In that moment, the grand hall fell utterly silent. Everyone present, whether they were lords of the Stormlands or bannermen of House Targaryen, held their breath in anticipation of what was to come. Argilla's ornate robe swayed gently with each graceful step. When she reached Aegon, she knelt before him. Then, slowly, she lifted her fair, slender hands and raised the storm crown high, offering it up like a sacred tribute to the gods. Aegon leaned forward slightly and solemnly accepted the crown she presented. He placed it carefully on the raised platform to the side. He extended his hand once more, helping Argilla to her feet, and smiled. From this day forward, you are the Lady of the Stormlands. May you uphold the laws of House Targaryen and guard this land in its name. I shall obey your grace's will. House Durrandon will forever be loyal to you and your kingdom, my king. Argilla bowed her head and offered a graceful curtsy. Aegon wrapped an arm around Argilla's slender waist, and the two walked side by side toward the storm throne. Once seated upon the throne, Argilla nestled quietly into Aegon's embrace. The lords of the Stormlands knelt on one knee before them, heads bowed. Each laid their sword before them, hilts turned toward Aegon and Argilla, a symbol of offering their strength and allegiance. Together, they proclaimed, to His Grace King Aegon and Her Highness Princess Argilla, we swear upon our blood and souls, eternal loyalty to the Targaryen dynasty, eternal loyalty to our liege lords of House Durrandon. May the king's light guide our way forward, and may the wisdom of the princess lead us in protecting our homeland. Aegon swept his gaze across the assembled vassals and responded firmly, your loyalty honors me. I hope we'll stand together in days to come. May the banner of House Targaryen forever fly over the Stormlands. Let our alliance be as unshakable as Storm's End itself. The nobles shouted in unison, may the glory of House Targaryen shine eternal over the Stormlands. May our loyalty be recorded in the pages of history. After the oath ceremony concluded in triumph, Aegon held 3 days of grand celebration within Storm's End. During that time, he and Lady Argilla reveled in a newfound closeness, indulging in the joys of their union. Aegon remembered well the promise he had made to the old Storm King, to give House Durrandon a Dragonseed and preserve the legacy of Storm's End. He devoted himself fully to this purpose, leaving nothing to chance. But the wheel of fate continued to turn, and sweet days passed swiftly. Only a few days later, Aegon received several critical messages at Storm's End, each one bearing great consequence for the Targaryen conquest. First, the Kingdom of the Reach and the Kingdom of the Rock had officially announced an alliance. Together, they vowed to resist the advance of the Targaryen dynasty. Second, the Kingdom of the North had gathered its forces in the neck to counter the Targaryen threat. King Torrhen Stark personally led 30,000 men, preparing to march south. The neck bordered the Riverlands, its defense was intertwined with the region. With the Riverlands already under Targaryen control, the neck now lay vulnerable. Yet despite the North's seemingly aggressive stance, it posed the least actual danger. Torrhen and Aegon had long come to a secret understanding and planned to stage a show of unity, of wise kings and loyal subjects, along the banks of the Trident. Third, Houses Hightower and Tyrell from the Reach each sent envoys to Aegon, seeking secret alliances with House Targaryen. It was clear both families hoped to benefit from the upheaval sweeping Westeros. Fourth, pirates from the Stepstones had begun raiding the coast of Cape Wrath, while Dornish raiders emerged from the Red Mountains, harassing the Dornish marches. Aegon dispatched his newly appointed admiral, Corlys Velaryon, to root them out. Corlys, younger brother of the fallen Ethan and second son of Daemon Velaryon, would carry out the mission with support from the Federal Council. Fifth, unrest had erupted in the Vale, sparked by a plot from the Dowager Queen. The three sisters had risen in rebellion. The so-called sistermen renounced their fealty to the Eyrie and crowned Lady Marla Sunderland as their queen. The young King Rhaenyra Arryn now faced threats from without and rebellion from within. Queen Shera Arryn had mustered troops at the Bloody Gate to hold off Queen Rhaenys and her dragon, Merryx's. But her defenses were little more than a spider's web in the face of a Kingtier dragon. When the gate fell, Queen Shera and her son retreated to the Eyrie to regroup. The Vale, beset by internal unrest and outside pressure, was now in a crisis similar to that which had befallen the Iron Kingdom under Black Heron. To avoid repeating the Iron King's fate, Queen Shera devised a different approach, one that relied on charm rather than steel. She had a carefully chosen half-nude portrait of herself sent to Aegon. In it, she appeared like a blooming rose, radiant and seductive. Along with it came an offer of marriage, on the condition that King Aegon recognize Rhaenyra as his heir. In her youth, Shera had been known across the Seven Kingdoms as the flower of the mountains, a beauty unmatched. Though time had touched her features, it had only deepened her allure with a graceful maturity. Her portrait was eventually delivered to Storm's End, and upon seeing it, Aegon found her appearance indeed beautiful, curvaceous and regal. Shera Arryn was 10 years Aegon's senior, and had just turned 24, an age of perfect elegance and strength. Aegon resolved to ride Balerion to the Vale, not out of desire for Shera's beauty, but to swiftly subdue the kingdom and proceed with the plan he had arranged with Torrhen Stark. The united forces of the Reach and the Rock were already gathering, pressing closer and closer to King's Landing along the Blackwater Rush. If the conquest was to succeed, its pace had to accelerate. If you'd like to support my work and unlock advanced chapters, you can follow me on Patreon. Up to 20 chapters ahead for now. Patreon comp BlurryDream. BlurryDream creators' thoughts. 4 comments 0 vote. Chapter 69, The Flower of the Mountain. Compared to other regions of Westeros, the Vale is more isolated and easier to defend. The Mountains of the Moon run through the Vale, encircling it on all sides. The most important pass is the Bloody Gate, a fortress that has remained unconquered for thousands of years, until now, when Queen Rhaenys has taken control of it. The Eyrie stands atop the Mountains of the Moon, straddling the Giant's Lance. 4 castles protect it, the Gates of the Moon at the base, followed by the Stone Waycastle, Snow Waycastle, and Sky Waycastle, each higher than the last. When Aegon arrived on Balerion to join the Targaryen army in the Vale, Rhaenys was leading the capture of the Gates of the Moon. The ownership of this stronghold is closely tied to the security of the Eyrie. For generations, the kings of the Vale have granted the Gates of the Moon to their heirs to safeguard the Eyrie's safety. After landing on the Gates of the Moon, Aegon immediately shared tales of his victories in the Stormlands with the Targaryen nobles and generals. His heroic feats left the gathered lords in awe. Aegon, however, deliberately kept quiet about his feelings for the Storm Queen. But Rhaenys had been sharp and perceptive since childhood. When she learned that Aegon had spared the Storm King's life and named Argilla as a lady, she recalled the reluctance he had shown during the Storm King's last marriage proposal. In an instant, she pieced it together and shot Aegon an annoyed glare. Aegon pretended not to notice and turned his attention to friendly conversation with the Riverlands nobles and the newly surrendered lords of the Vale, quickly growing familiar with them. After a warm night with Queen Rhaenys, Aegon mounted Balerion and flew straight to the royal palace of the King of Mountain and Vale, the Eyrie. The Bloody Gate was famed for being virtually impregnable, its terrain already dauntingly steep and treacherous. Yet even that paled in comparison to the Eyrie's grandeur and sheer inaccessibility. The only route to the Eyrie was a narrow, winding mountain path. The road was perilous, one misstep could send a traveler plummeting from the heights into the sea of clouds below. Despite its many defenses, none of them could stop a Targaryen dragon. Aegon soared high atop Balerion, bypassing all defenses, and landed safely within the Eyrie itself. The tremendous impact of Balerion's landing caused an uproar throughout the castle. Like pouring a cup of water into a quiet anthill, the peaceful calm was instantly shattered. Regent Queen Shera of the Vale rushed over with more than a dozen guards the moment she heard the commotion. To her astonishment, she found Aegon at ease on the balcony of the White Tower, playing with the young king of the Vale, Rhaenys Arryn. The little king was wailing as Aegon tried to entertain him, rolling and wriggling on the floor in a full tantrum. The moment Aegon caught sight of Queen Shera, his eyes were drawn to her, and he couldn't help but be struck by her breathtaking beauty. Shera's face had soft, elegant lines, but carried a hint of boldness. She was tall and graceful, her slender waist and unusually full hips swaying with every step, drawing elegant curves beneath her ornate gown. The hem of the dress swayed gently as she walked. After a pause, Aegon came back to himself and offered a smile tinged with both awkwardness and apology. He truly had little experience with children. Though he tried hard to amuse the little king, Rhaenys only seemed more upset, his crying growing even louder. Seeing Aegon flustered, Queen Shera let out a soft chuckle. With her laughter, her ample chest quivered slightly. Aegon quickly looked away. Staring any longer would make him seem too eager, unbefitting the bearing of a king. He had come to bring the Vale to submission, not to bully a widow and her orphaned son. Queen Shera gracefully ascended the stairs of the White Tower and entered the hall where Aegon stood. She quietly signaled her maid to take young King Rhaenys away, then elegantly poured Aegon a cup of hot tea. As she leaned forward, the curve of her cleavage was fully revealed. Aegon's gaze drifted to it without thinking. Your Grace Aegon, are you perhaps considering a marriage alliance with me? Queen Shera parted her red lips as she gently blew on the steaming tea, then offered it to Aegon with both hands. As she brought her arms together, her full chest appeared even more alluring, the sight enough to stir any man's heart. Aegon accepted the tea and couldn't help but sigh inwardly. Every movement of this woman seemed to hold endless allure, pulling a man's thoughts in all directions. But he quickly composed himself, refocusing on his original intent and purpose. I have come to persuade you to surrender, Lady Shera. The Vale has no need to continue its futile struggle. Surely you do not want to see your son follow in Harren's footsteps. Aegon put down his teacup and stated his purpose bluntly. Your Grace's words are truly unwelcome. Could it be that my appearance is not pleasing enough to arouse your interest? Queen Shera glared at Aegon with slight resentment. She moved gracefully to his side and sat down, gently pulling Aegon's hand and shaking it slowly. Her beautiful, aggrieved appearance would have moved anyone to pity. Lady, please control yourself. I have come to discuss matters of state with the Eyrie. Aegon's expression was calm as he withdrew his hand without a trace. Queen Shera would not give up, and once again grabbed Aegon's hand, placing it on her chest and saying softly, in that case, Your Grace, why not give me a lesson in politics? After all, I am just a woman and know nothing about these matters. Seeing this, Aegon sighed helplessly, his gaze falling on her voluptuous body pressing against him, and said softly, Lady, why are you pushing me so hard? ... Outside the White Tower, the sound of dragon wings flapping could be heard again. It was Queen Visenya riding Vhagar, rushing from Crackclaw Point. Visenya was quite critical of Aegon's decision to send his sister Rhaenys to lead the Riverlands nobles to attack the Vale. She had been competitive since childhood and had rarely lost to her sister in the past. Now that she had just suffered a defeat in Gulltown at the hands of the Vale, and her sister Rhaenys was about to capture the Vale's castle. How could Visenya not be displeased? Therefore, after successfully subduing the lords of Crackclaw Point, Queen Visenya rode her dragon to the Eyrie, intent on using its power to force Queen Shera, the regent of the Vale, to surrender. Just as she and Vhagar flew over the Eyrie, her gaze suddenly locked on something below, and she realized that Balerion had beaten her to it. She ordered Vhagar to land next to Balerion. Visenya leapt lightly from the dragon's back and looked around, but saw no sign of Aegon, so she began to search the vicinity. At that moment, she heard a commotion and turned to see a group of maids frantically trying to calm a little boy wearing a crown. She heard the maids anxiously calling the boy, "Little King," and Visenya's mind raced. She instantly realized that she had stumbled upon a crucial bargaining chip. She ordered Vhagar to scare away the guards who were closing in. Visenya rushed forward and quickly approached the little king. She had thought that the boy would be frightened by her imposing presence and start crying, but to her surprise, he only looked at her with a hint of familiarity. However, to her surprise, the little boy was only slightly startled. Not only did he show no fear, but he even seemed to want to get closer to her. Her heart stirred, and she let a subtle smile appear on her face. She bent down, picked up the little boy, and asked softly, "Where is your mother, Lady Shera? Let me take you to her, and I'll take you riding a dragon so you can fly through the sky. How about it?" Upon hearing this, the little King Ronel was so excited that his little face turned red, and he clapped his hands happily, repeating, "Yes, yes, yes." Following Ronel's directions, Visenya arrived at the Eagle King's Tower, one of the 7 white towers of the main castle. Holding Ronel in her arms, she stepped onto the stairs leading up to the tower. Halfway up, Visenya's footsteps suddenly stopped, and she couldn't help but freeze in place, her hands unconsciously tightening and almost hurting little Ronel. She heard a voice that made her burn with rage. It was the familiar panting of her husband Aegon, mixed with another coquettish cry. At this point, she already knew exactly what was happening in the tower. "Big sister, why don't you go up? My mother is upstairs. There's also a very mean brother. Can you help me teach him a lesson?" Little Ronel said innocently, his eyes full of confusion. Visenya exhaled heavily and tried to make her voice sound calm. She could only say, "You don't need to go find your mother. I'll take you to ride the dragon right now." "Okay, okay." Upon hearing this, Ronel was so excited that he cheered loudly, clapping his little hands happily in the air. The woman in the room seemed to have heard her son's voice, and her moans stopped abruptly. But after only a few seconds, the sounds rose again uncontrollably, even louder than before. Visenya gritted her teeth in anger and spat. She hugged the little King Ronel tightly and turned to leave the White Tower in a hurry. They returned to the inner courtyard where Vhagar was parked, and Visenya lifted the little King Ronel onto the dragon. Vhagar spread its huge wings, rose into the air, and flew around the peak of the giant's lance 3 times with them. As night fell, Aegon learned from his maid that his sister Visenya had arrived at the Eyrie after a long and passionate encounter with Lady Shera. He calmly tidied himself up and went to find Visenya. When he saw Visenya's cold face, Aegon began to use his silver tongue, pouring out words of love like a string of pearls. At first, Visenya's face was tense, looking unyielding, but under Aegon's verbal assault, her eyes gradually softened, and the atmosphere between the two gradually warmed up, returning to harmony. The Valyrians had a polygamous marriage system, and although the Targaryens had assimilated much of the local culture of Westeros, the influence of ancient Valyria was still profound. It was only natural that Visenya and Rhaenys would tolerate Aegon's promiscuity. Lady Shera prepared a banquet for Aegon and Visenya. She also sent people down the mountain to inform the nobles defending against the Targaryen army that the grueling defensive war was over and that the Valley Kingdom had agreed to Aegon's demand to be demoted to a lordship. The next day, the sun was shining brightly. Queen Rhaenys and the lords of the Riverlands and the Vale finally arrived at the Eyrie. A grand and solemn oath of allegiance ceremony was held once again in the Eyrie. Aegon, dressed in magnificent robes, sat proudly on the former throne of the Falcon King, his eyes sternly fixed on the crowd. The lords knelt on one knee and solemnly swore allegiance, their voices echoing through the valley. At this point, the Vale, one of the 7 kingdoms, had been successfully conquered and pacified. In this war, Aegon not only gained land and power, but also a close lover. The Eyrie was immersed in the great success of the Targaryen dynasty's conquest and held 3 days of lively banquets to celebrate. 3 days later, the Targaryens, new and old advisors began to bustle about, preparing their troops and equipment to leave the Vale. Aegon had received news that the army of the Winterfell kingdom, led by King Torrhen, had advanced into the Riverlands. If you'd like to support my work and unlock advanced chapters, you can follow me on Patreon. Up to 20 chapters ahead for now. Patreon comp BlurryDream. BlurryDream creators' thoughts. 2 comments 0 vote. Chapter 70. The Submission of the North. Aegon left the Vale with 3 crowns of great significance. They were the Queen Regent's crown, her son's small crown, and the falcon crown worn by the kings of House Arryn for 1,000 years. The combined forces of the Riverlands, the Vale, and the Crownlands under House Targaryen gathered into a mighty army of nearly 20,000. In tight, orderly formation, they marched out from the Vale, encircled by the Mountains of the Moon. No sooner had the Targaryen army passed through the treacherous Bloody Gate than they encountered the king in the north, Torrhen Stark, who had led the northern host south himself. They met unexpectedly on the northern bank of the Trident, swords drawn in tense confrontation. In terms of numbers, the 2 sides were evenly matched. But overhead, the 3 dragons of House Targaryen circled and soared, casting immense shadows across the land. An invisible pressure, like a storm cloud, began to weigh down on the hearts of every northern warrior. The sharp-eyed northern barbarians quickly noticed something strange. The Targaryen host was made up of a surprisingly diverse mix of people. There were men from the Riverlands, the Stormlands, the Vale, slaves from Volantis, and even Northmen. What? Northmen? Cries of surprise echoed through the northern ranks. In the tense standoff, familiar northern warriors couldn't suppress their curiosity and began calling out to each other. Torrhen, wearing his crown, coughed heavily a few times, signaling to his nobles to quiet the growing chatter in their lines. But a few thick-skinned northern barbarians seized the lull to shout across the field, making loud plans with their countrymen to go fishing in the Trident together once the battle was over. Aegon rode out calmly on a white horse, emerging slowly from the ranks of the Targaryen army. The noise from both sides gradually faded. All eyes widened, fixed on the young Dragonlord. Thanks to Torrhen's deliberate spread of favorable tales, Aegon's reputation had already swept through the north like wildfire. Minstrels had sung his praises until the man seemed more myth than mortal. Whether it was the fearsome bulk of the Black Dread or Aegon's fearless deeds in the Stormlands, all of it served to prove that this was a king of strength, skill, and ambition, one to be feared. Torrhen held a massive Valyrian steel greatsword nearly 2 meters long, ice. The blade gleamed with a cold light as he gripped it in reverse and spurred his horse forward. With an imposing air, he rode to the front lines, facing Aegon directly. In the eyes of those watching, the 2 kings stood on the brink of battle, each ready to charge at the slightest spark. Tension spread across the battlefield like a thick fog. Warriors on both sides were sweating, their nerves stretched tight. King Torrhen, your name precedes you, Aegon called out. But your actions are unwise. To challenge the Dragonlord of Valyria is no different from striking a rock with an egg. Though not far from Torrhen, Aegon raised his voice deliberately so that all could hear. Torrhen's face flushed red. Most assumed it was from anger, but in truth, he was fighting back laughter, barely able to contain it. Even if you hold the overwhelming advantage, even if your dragons could destroy the north with ease, the warriors of the north will never retreat. We do not bow to tyranny. In the north, men fall in battle, but no one surrenders. Torrhen roared the words at Aegon, his voice echoing across the field like thunder. His impassioned declaration sent a surge of pride and rage through the northern army. One after another, they shouted back at the Targaryens. Some of the more hot-blooded among them even reached for their swords, ready to charge without waiting for a signal. Aegon remained stoic, his expression cold as ice. He raised one hand to the sky. From above, Valyrian the Black Dread dove down, a beast nearly 100 meters long, its massive form blotting out the sun. The earth trembled with the force of its descent, and the thunderous presence silenced every northern barbarian who had been shouting moments before. Where moments ago they had fidgeted like ants on a hot pan, the Northmen were struck speechless by the awe-inspiring might of the Black Dread. Almost as one, their eyes turned to their king. Torrhen did not disappoint. Like a fearless warrior, he paid no mind to the monstrous presence looming above. He rode his warhorse forward with unwavering composure, straight to Aegon Targaryen, beneath the looming head of Balerion, large as a mountain. In that instant, every Northman stood stunned by Torrhen's defiant act. They asked themselves if they could have done the same, ridden so calmly to stand before a dragon like a living mountain, offering themselves up to its jaws. Balerion's massive head loomed above Aegon, hot steam hissing from his cavernous nostrils. His dragon fangs, sharp as blades and as large as horses, jutted out with terrifying menace. And yet, before this nightmare of a beast, their king stood unflinching, boldly confronting Aegon face to face. Every Northman's heart pounded in their chest. They stared at the king in the winter, eyes full of worry, reverence, and a flicker of hope. I've said it before, the people of the North do not fear tyranny. Even if you had 10 dragons, 100 dragons, you'd still fail. You'll never force the North to yield. Torrhen shouted coldly, his voice echoing across the battlefield. His words reignited the fighting spirit of the northern host. They panted heavily, eyes locked onto the Targaryen army, burning with unyielding resolve. You are the bravest and most valiant king I've ever seen. I truly admire your courage. But know this, my conquest will not be halted by fearlessness alone, Aegon called back loudly. The two men stood face to face, hurling words at each other with such force that spittle flew between them. Torrhen shouted, King Aegon Targaryen, I've heard you're a warrior without equal. If you can defeat me, the strongest man of the North, then I, the King of Winter, will kneel before you in honor of your valor. Very well. If you know my name and still dare to make such a demand, then I shall grant it, last King of the North. Aegon replied, his voice full of steely resolve. The warriors on both sides were stirred to the core by the king's fiery exchange. Their blood boiled as they erupted into frenzied cries. King against king. King against king. King against king. The chant surged like a tidal wave, growing louder and louder, resounding across the battlefield. Torrhen wheeled his horse around to face all his vassals, raising his arms high as he roared, My people! Do you stand with your king? Do you dare let me fight? Do you have the courage to let me fight? Fight! 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 The Northmen roared like enraged beasts, their battle-lust ignited. Many of them beat their fists against their chests, the sound booming like war drums. A small smirk tugged at the corner of Torrhen's lips, his plan was nearly complete. If he were to surrender outright, his reputation would be ruined, and rebellion would soon follow in the north. So he and Aegon had carefully staged this confrontation, crafting a performance to convince the war-hungry northerners to accept Targaryen rule of their own accord, and to allow Torrhen to step down peacefully. Now, the tension had reached its peak. Everything was proceeding as planned. Torrhen and Aegon slowly dismounted. They stepped onto the pebbled shore of the Trident's north bank, ready to fight on foot. This battle, hailed by some as the clash of the century, unfolded under the eyes of nearly 40,000 men. Both kings were famed warriors, and their duel lived up to every tale. Valyrian steel clashed in a blur of power and skill, each blow fierce and formidable. They traded strikes with practiced precision, making the battle all the more spectacular. Every soldier on the field watched, transfixed, their cheers rising in waves. The fighting raged on, so intense and balanced that the two kings were forced to pause and catch their breath more than once. After thousands of exchanges, it came down to a single move. Torrhen, just one step behind, was narrowly defeated by Aegon, and the grand drama of this kingly duel came to its conclusion. Aegon reached out and pulled Torrhen up, shouting with emotion, You are the strongest, bravest warrior I've ever met in Westeros. Had I not borne the sacred power of the Valyrian Dragonlords, I might not have defeated such a bold and honorable man. You have my deepest respect. Torrhen clasped Aegon's hand tightly and stood, then bellowed in return, Your Grace, you are without a doubt the most powerful and regal king I have ever faced. Compared to you, I am indeed lesser. But the North has always known how to accept defeat with honor. From this day forth, all the people of the North shall recognize only you as the rightful High King, and will obey only the laws of the Targaryen dynasty. With those words, Torrhen knelt without hesitation and solemnly placed the crown of the king in the North at Aegon's feet. Though their praise for one another may have sounded excessive, they hadn't lost sight of their purpose. Aegon, visibly moved, helped Torrhen to his feet and gave him a firm pat on the back. The two naturally slung arms around each other's shoulders. The Northmen, momentarily stunned, were caught off guard. But some were genuinely touched by the powerful display of emotion, and unable to contain their feelings, they began applauding Aegon and Lord Torrhen with heartfelt enthusiasm. Aegon and Torrhen joined in the applause, and at Aegon's gesture, the Targaryen army followed suit. Thunderous clapping filled the battlefield. Once the mood had settled a little, Aegon slowly raised his hands and gently pressed down. The applause gradually died away. All the Northmen now had their eyes fixed on their newly sworn king. Aegon stepped forward confidently, chest lifted high, and proclaimed in a loud, clear voice. From this day forth, no grain ship bound for White Harbor in winter shall be taxed, not a single coin. No one is to charge even a penny more for the food that keeps our northern brothers and sisters alive. This is the first law I decree as your king. The Northmen were stunned silent at first, then erupted into a thunderous roar of cheers that shook the sky. Aegon raised his hands again, and slowly lowered them. The cheering faded into silence. Then he declared again, from now on, all regions of Westeros shall equally contribute warriors to the wall, to defend humanity's most vital frontier. Each of us bears the responsibility and duty to protect it. His words struck deep. Many among the Northmen were so moved that tears welled in their eyes. In that moment, Aegon had fully won their loyalty and admiration. The two greatest hardships of the North, winter starvation and the burden of guarding the wall, had claimed countless lives over generations. For Aegon to address both with such understanding and to establish laws solely for the benefit of the North, it was clear he carried the North in his heart. He was, without doubt, the true king the North had longed for. One by one, the northern warriors dropped to a knee, and then, like falling dominoes, the entire northern host followed, kneeling in unison before Aegon. Their voices rose in a single, powerful chant, proclaiming their loyalty.